Minimalists.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Minimalist Podcast, where we discuss what it means to live a meaningful life with less. My name is Joshua Fields Milburn, and Ryan Nicodemus is out on assignment today. That assignment is vacation in Montana. So I have two guys here with me. Listen, the last few years, I've had quite a few health problems. I'm turning 37 this week, and 2 years ago on my birthday was sort of this nadir of health problems. And in fact, I had so many problems, I had to write them down so that I could remember how many health problems I had. I've got Christopher Kelly with me and Dr. Tommy Woods, and we're going to talk. They're both from a company called Nourish, Balance, Thrive, and they've helped me out immensely over the last 2 years with a lot of these health problems I've had. So, Chris, I reached out to you. It was literally on my birthday when we talked. I don't know if you know this, but it was my 35th birthday.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to paint the picture for everyone. I've had immense back pain since I was a teen. I broke my L5 and it eventually fused to my S1. In fact, whenever I get if I got an MRI or CAT scan, doctors are like, "Oh, you must have had a surgery to have that fused." And no, they just sort of grew together. And I couldn't sit down for like 6 months when I was a freshman in high school because of that. Oh. In Ohio, where I grew up, we were playing ice basketball one day, and someone tackled me during ice basketball. And ever since then, I've had some back issues, and I was under control throughout most of my 20s, and then into my 30s, it started to get more and more pronounced, and the pain was really bad. The beginning of 2016, January 2016, I was waking up with 10 out of 10 horrible, like, sciatica, and just the pain was unbearable. Like, so unbearable, I was like, how am I going to get through this next second? And so I started to see different doctors, and I saw a surgeon. I was 2 weeks out from having surgery, and then but then I found out about this type of physical therapy that I started doing. It's called Egoscue therapy, and I'm sure we can talk about that if necessary. But that helped out a little bit with the back pain. But I suspected something else was wrong. Like maybe there was some hormonal imbalance or something, because I wasn't sort of recovering the way that I should. Like I was doing 2 hours of physical therapy every day, but it wasn't really taking like it should. And on top of that, when I was about age 27, I started developing these weird allergies, like seasonal allergies, but also chemical sensitivities. I moved into this apartment, and all of a sudden, it was right after my divorce, and I thought maybe, I'm just depressed. But I didn't really see the correlation right away. I would go I'd go home, and I'd start feeling these weird symptoms. My throat would get sore, my eyes would get watery. I'd start to have this really weak, pathetic cough, just and I thought, oh, maybe I'm depressed. And I went to a doctor, and he said, oh yeah, well, your mom died, your marriage ended, you're probably depressed right now. And I went to another doctor, and he's like, oh, no, it's not depression, it's asthma. Here's an inhaler, have a good day. And I saw several doctors, I couldn't really figure out, and then I moved, and those symptoms got better all of a sudden. I moved into a place that I didn't have a chemical sensitivity to. And then I kind of ignored the symptoms because they weren't bad enough, they weren't causing enough pain that I was willing to make some radical changes in my life. But then around age 34 and 35, it all started to come crashing down. I moved into this apartment in Montana, and I was so allergic to it, for lack of a better word, so sensitive. They had just refinished the floors, they had just painted the walls, and I felt like I couldn't breathe in there. I had to move out, like emergency level, couldn't stand it anymore. And I started to feel helpless. I started to feel this type of despair. There was this sensitivity there, but then I was having all these gut problems at the same time. Like it was hard for me to digest anything like wheat or just carbohydrates in general. Like anytime I would eat fiber, I had the worst kind of gas, and it was terrible. But then around the summer of 2016, I started getting like brain fog. And then I got this temporary memory loss. Like short-term memories were just gone. And I couldn't, and then I started to not be able to remember basic words. Like I would look at the table, but I wouldn't remember that it was called a table. Like what's the name of this thing? It was so frightening. And then like my hormones were all out of whack. Like I'm in the best relationship I've ever been in. Rebecca, my partner, is amazing. She's so supportive, and we're going to actually talk a little bit about that today, having supportive people when we're going through these health problems. In fact, she's made it so much easier for me to get through a lot of these health problems. But she's been so supportive, and I'm in this great relationship with a person I'm so attracted to, but my libido was through the floor. Summer of 2016, not only was my libido through the floor, but I had problems with erectile dysfunction. And so I'm like, okay, wait a minute. I've got terrible back pain, horrible back pain. I've got brain fog. I can't remember stuff. I can't digest things. I can't be around paint or any sort of chemicals without having all these terrible allergies. I had horrible seasonal allergies. And there got to a point, and by the way, my hormones are so out of whack that I'm not even attracted to the person I'm attracted to. I'm not attracted to anyone. I have no desire to have sex or anything. Like, what the hell is going on with me? And then I got desperate. And so, where do you go when you get desperate? Google. And I stumbled across this website for this company called Nourish, Balance, Thrive. It was actually, you did a podcast with a guy named Ben Greenfield.
Oh yeah.
I had no idea who Ben Greenfield was.
Oh really?
I had no idea who you were, but thanks to Google, it connected me to the Ben Greenfield podcast.
That's amazing.
And then you were talking about many of the things that were going on with me, and I realized like, wow, maybe there's some sort of solution. Now, obviously, I wanted a magic pill. Yeah. I wanted to call Chris up and say, hey, give me a prescription to fix this immediately. And I remember talking to you on my 35th birthday. And the thing that you said to me, you said, hey, it's going to be okay. And I can't tell you, like, how relieving that was. I know it was like the strangest sort of like, it's weird that I needed permission to realize like, oh, maybe this is going to be okay. Because to be honest with you, that summer I really thought I was dying. Like I thought this was the slow descent towards death. I mean, when you start losing your memory, all of a sudden you're like, oh, I mean, I got my will in order, and I was preparing to like, oh, this might be the end of it all. And I talked to you on the phone, and you said, hey, we've got a program. I could try to work with you. We can do some testing, and we could talk about some of these problems. And you started talking to me about really basic things like sleep and hormones and diet and exercise and these were all things that I knew, like fundamentally, but like we started getting into the more granular things that would be more applicable for me. Like we all know that diet and exercise and sleep are important. And I had a pretty good diet and exercise regimen, and I had what I thought was a decent sleep regimen. It actually wasn't, but it is now, thankfully. And over the last 2 years, we have slowly worked together to try to get to the bottom of what these health problems are. And the weird thing is, even though it's all in one body, I'm all one person, I didn't realize how interconnected all of these problems are. Like, it's almost like I treated them as if they were standing in separate corners of the room, right?
Right.
And so, Chris, when I called you and we started talking about, hey, this is going to be okay, what were your first thoughts when I started telling you about some of these issues I was dealing with?
Well, the story resonated. I mean, it's the exact reason I started the business, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you always wonder. I mean, that's what I did. I went onto the Ben Greenfield podcast and told a story similar to yours,
right,
thinking, am I completely bonkers? Am I the only person this has ever happened to?
Yeah.
And then, several hundred people come forward and say, that's exactly what happened to me. Can you send me all of the things that you did? I want the diet, I want the tests, I want the supplements, I want everything you did in a package that I can buy. Here's my credit card number. And
but when we do that, we're also sort of looking. Again, I knew I wanted the immediate result, but I knew that wasn't possible. That was the first thing you talked to me about too. Like, hey, it's going to take some time. This is a process, and the thing that you've known working with me the last 2 years, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I'm willing to put in the work. Whatever work is required, I am willing to do that, because I also understand I'm not going to just like, oh, here, I'm going to upload this program into my brain, and via osmosis, all of a sudden I'm healed. And I know it doesn't work that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've been extraordinary in that regard. I was thinking about that earlier today, that most people, they have ambivalence. When I ask you to start eating red meat because you have an iron deficiency, most people, they kind of squirm a bit and say, you know what, I really like not eating meat. I don't think I'm going to do that, but you were extraordinary in that every time we came up with a record. I say we, it's not the royal we. So at this point, it might be an idea to introduce how this program works. It's not just me. I didn't just show up with all this information.
Right.
I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, especially Tommy. And so Tommy is the architect of our program. And I think of myself as a builder. I show up on site, and it's not really on site. It's via Zoom or the telephone in this case.
Sure.
And deliver somebody's information. But yeah, usually what happens is people have ambivalence and they don't really want to change, and it takes some time before they do start to implement some of the things that we recommend. But you are extraordinary in that you just present the evidence, and then the next time we talk, it's done. Like, I reintroduce. I had a ribeye steak yesterday. It was fantastic.
But I had to treat it as medicine, right? Like, so here's the weird thing. When I was in my mid-20s, I was a vegan for a year on a bet. So I used to weigh about 80 pounds more than I weigh now, and so I was just looking for ways to lose weight, and I'd heard about this vegan diet, and I'm like, oh, it was clearly healthier than what I was eating, right? And so for a year, Ryan and I both went on this vegan diet. We're both in the corporate world, and the reason we did it is I told him about it one day, and he's like, what the hell is a vegan? And I'm like, I was like, oh, don't worry about it, Ryan, you could never do it. And that's the only thing you ever need to tell Ryan, is he can't do something. He's like, well, forget it, I'm going to go research this thing, and I'm going to figure this out today. He calls me up a few hours later, and he's like, all right, I'm in, and I bet you I can do it longer than you. And so he actually won the bet. I did it for 11 months. And but then I went back, and like, I lost the taste for meat. I went back to eating fish, and I ate for the next decade, I ate fish once or twice a day, and that caused some mercury poisoning, which we can talk about in a little bit. That mixed with the sort of metal in my mouth, and so that was an additional health problem that I had tacked on to everything else that we had just talked about. But so when we did the initial test, and you're like, hey, you're low on iron, I think you should reintroduce meat, and I'm like cringing, because like I knew it was gross to me at the time, but also like I wanted to treat it as medicine. And so literally, I remember that first day I went over to Chipotle, and I was like, I know I can't eat the whole portion of meat right now, right? And so I said, just give me 3 little cubes of the steak. And they're like, what? I'm like, just give me 3 cubes of the steak. Like, I have to eat these right now. And then like, I'll slowly reintroduce this, because it is medicine, and no, just like a little kid. I mean, I've got a 5-year-old. She doesn't want to take her medicine at night, and so what do? They have some sort of sugar coating, right?
Right, a reward.
Well, yeah, and so for me, the reward was feeling better, and I knew that I wouldn't feel better instantly, but this was what was going to get me to go down that road. And so we went through some tests. We first figured out I had something called C. diff.
Right, an overgrowth of unfriendly bacteria.
Right, and everyone has C. diff to a certain extent.
Right.
It's a bacteria. But can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it might be more appropriate for Tommy to talk about it. But I think, so you're right. It's there in everybody's gut. But when something goes wrong and you lose the other key players, then this bad guy has the opportunity to overgrow. Do you think that's fair, Tommy? Do you want to?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So when people talk about what's going on in the gut and the bugs in the gut microbiota, whatever you want to call it, it's often characterized as these are good and these are bad, but that's never the case in medicine or biology, right? Sadly, it's just not that simple. However, when you have an imbalance, so you have too much of one versus and not enough of another, that's usually how they come together, then you're gonna see some issues. And C. diff is a common one, particularly now with the use of antibiotics. So if you take particularly broad spectrum antibiotics, or antibiotics that target a lot of different bacteria, then you sort of clean out some of what's going on in the gut, and most of it's good, and then some of these other guys they grow to fill the niche that's been left by those other bugs that you've killed with the antibiotics. And C. diff is one, particularly in hospitals, particularly in older people. Not that I'm calling you old, but that's where we see them, where we see it most frequently, and it can be life-threatening, actually, an overgrowth of C. diff. But we see it very frequently in our clients who, for various reasons, there's some kind of imbalance going on, and then it can cause issues. So that's exactly what was happening with you.
Absolutely, and the thing is, for almost the previous decade, so I had really bad scalp acne, which is probably the best place to have acne, because if you have hair, it covers it up, right? And so I'm like, it was actually a soy allergy. I didn't know that for many years, but like if I eat a piece of tofu, I get a huge outbreak on my head, right? And so I didn't realize at the time, and so I went to a dermatologist, and he's like, yeah, Bactrin, it's this antibiotic, you just take it every single day, it's benign. And I'm like, oh, the doctor said the antibiotic's benign, so I'm taking this antibiotic every day for nearly a decade, and it totally destroyed my gut. It was right around it was shortly before my mother died, my marriage ended, so I had these two traumatic events. I also worked in retail, and we were remodeling all of these stores right around the same time, so I was exposed to all these crazy chemicals that were going on. So I opened dozens of retail stores, and I was there, with the hard hats and everything, and making sure everyone was doing their job. So I was exposed to all these chemicals. I'm doing this intense antibiotic treatment, and plus, anytime I got a cold, what did I do? I went and got a Z-Pack or whatever, and they just take the antibiotics and you'll be fine. I totally destroyed my gut, and I right around 27 and then beyond, I just started having all these gut issues, which through this testing, which, by the way, when you first started sending me these tests, it's not like it's just one test, right? I mean, my kitchen was just filled with piss and shit and blood.
Shit's in the mail.
Yes. I mean, it was like you've got these little stool things, and you're peeing on things, you're spitting on vials, and you're peeing on these strips. But this was important in figuring out, like, and the interesting thing is, I think out of the first 6 or 7 tests that we did, a lot of them came back sort of, I'll say, inconclusive. You're like, all right, there isn't a whole lot to do with this here. And then all of a sudden, we got the 6th or 7th one back. And you're like, oh, here's the C. diff thing. And then from there, you recommended doing some stuff with supplementation and with my diet that would change that. Mm-hmm. And I remember talking about leaky gut as well. Is that something that we should talk about at this point?
Sure.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah, it's an important problem.
So it's actually a really interesting problem, because it's not really accepted in the regular medical community. And there are a few things that sort of exist in the fringe health sphere, which we occasionally inhabit.
But I want to be really clear that the reason I was so attracted to what you guys were talking about is you may have, like, you dip a toe into the Eastern world, but only if there's like evidence,
some evidence to support it.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not just like, well, here, yeah, just if the first call, Chris would have been like, yeah, just rub this crystal against your face 3 times a day. Like, even as desperate as I was for answers, yeah. I think I would have said, yeah, thank you very much, have a nice day.
That's actually the next phase.
Crystal suppositories.
So you're right. One of the benefits of not being in a rigid, formalized medical system, which we're not, is that you can change and adapt and adopt things as they become more evidence-based. And that's something, leaky gut is certainly one of those things. Some people might call it intestinal permeability. And there's plenty of evidence to show that people with various autoimmune diseases, even metabolic diseases, type 2 diabetes, if you take a piece of their gut and you look at it, there's, for want of a better word, there's holes in it. There's meant to be connections between the cells in the gut that stop things that you don't want coming across. Mm-hmm. And there are many things that can affect that, and it can be foods you're intolerant to. It could be certain toxic things that you're exposed to. One thing that C. diff does is it makes a toxin which breaks down or causes some of those junctions to be broken down. So that results in a leakier gut or some degree of intestinal permeability. And then what happens is either things that parts of the bacteria. So bacteria, they're there, they do good stuff for us, but they do also contain some things that can be toxic. Those have easier access to your body. Other things that you're eating that maybe you don't want to get into your bloodstream until you've fully digested them, they're getting across early. That can also cause issues. So whatever the initial cause is, and there can be many, then all of a sudden you have this whole host of symptoms. And this is one of those things where you're talking about how the whole body is connected, and often it's at least part of that is connected through the gut. It's something that we see certainly very frequently in our clients, the people that we work with. And this is one of the downsides of the way modern medicine is structured, which is that everybody's separated by a body part, right? So you have a neurologist who only looks at your brain, and you have a hepatologist or who only looks at your liver, and you have an ophthalmologist who will only look at your eyes, except for the fact that all of these things are connected by a bloodstream and all these other things that are happening in the body at the same time. The hormone signaling covers the whole body. So when we sort of separate out body parts, we don't look at the big picture as often, and I think that's where we hopefully can start to piece things together, and often, as was the case with you, it sort of can stem with some kind of large exposure or something that's going on inside the gut.
Well, I think that's one of the big problems, because when I went to doctors and they said, here's an inhaler, or you're just depressed and let me prescribe some Nardil or something, and I'm against sort of antidepressants unless I think they're absolutely necessary. I think we suffer from a lot of sadness, and we often categorize it as depression, and we try to just give someone the medicine when there's a whole bunch of other like sort of real medicine that will work better, like exercise and sunlight and water.
Right.
People try these things as well. But I remember going to a GI doctor who's like because in my early 30s, as my gut problems got worse, I'm like, hey, I'll go to a GI doctor, and he's like, yeah, just take some Metamucil for the rest of your life and you'll be fine. And
I mean, that's the other main reason I started the business, was as an engineer, I recognized that there was absolutely zero attempt to see what was going wrong. There was no root cause analysis. Like, it's obviously a complex system, and I can see that you've spent exactly 0 minutes trying to figure out what's causing this problem. So for the example of your scalp acne, they didn't spend a lot of time trying to investigate whether or not it was a food sensitivity that was causing that problem. I'm just going to jump straight to a solution that I just happen to have right here in my desk drawer. Right. And of course, this just doesn't work. It doesn't work in health. It doesn't work anywhere else either.
No.
So for example, when I'm riding a bicycle and I get a flat tire, if I just shove another tube in there and pump it up, the chances are it's just going to go flat again, because the thorn is still stuck in the tire, or whatever punctured the tube is still there.
Exactly.
You have to find out why the tire went flat before you put a new tube in. And for some reason in medicine, they don't do that. They just jump straight to the solution, which in my opinion doesn't work.
Right. And because often the solution is figuring out what the problem actually is, right? And for me it was, okay, I'm having these gut problems, but it's not just like all of a sudden your gut's gone bad. It's there's something that's underlying it. And one was like, hey, no more antibiotics unless absolutely necessary. And don't get me wrong, I'm not an anti-antibiotic guy. What's an anti-antibiotic guy? A biotic guy? But I'm all for them when appropriate, right?
Yeah.
It's just we've been using them inappropriately. In fact, one of the words I use when people we talk about minimalism, and that word scares people, then I say, okay, just use the word appropriate. Like maybe it's appropriatism. Like, because what's appropriate for your life may not be appropriate for mine with respect to the material possessions that we own. And by the way, when I first found minimalism, I was 28 years old, and I'll be 37 this week, so almost a decade later. What was appropriate then isn't appropriate now. I've got a 5-year-old daughter. Like, my life is different. And it's true with each of our diets and our health. I think there are some overarching principles that make a lot of sense. But then what really helped me is when we chatted, you got down to the granular level, and we said, okay, here are some tests that are appropriate, and we'll try these. In fact, you even waited on the heavy metals test, because when I had this leaky gut, you're like, we can't even address heavy metals until we address the leaky gut thing. So why was that?
Yeah, so we've seen a lot of people get worse. I mean, Tommy, you might be able to talk to some of the more specific technical details, but if you've got increased intestinal permeability, aka leaky gut, and also heavy metal toxicity, and you try and pull those metals out of where they're safely in storage, then the gut is an important part of that detoxification process. And I've known several people that have gotten much worse. You know, you go to, another problem in medicine is that people tend to specialize, and then whatever problem you go to them with, this is definitely a heavy metal problem. I've seen this thousands of times before. It's a heavy metal problem. So we're just going to go straight into IV chelation therapy, and it's going to fix you because every problem is a heavy metal problem.
Yeah, it's like you give. When I almost did the back surgery, I was 2 weeks away from that. Yeah. Of course, I went to a surgeon, and he recommended surgery, right?
He didn't recommend chakra alignment, right? Surprise, surprise.
Yeah, and the sad thing is, and he was a great guy. In fact, I really like him, but all he had to do was recommend this thing called Egoscue therapy. That, or at least try this out. Like there's some sort of physical therapy that you can do. For me, it was I still do it. I did it this morning. I do it for 45 minutes every single day because I have that messed up vertebrae. And there's like 25 Egoscue clinics across the country. I've sent other people there. I don't get any endorsement from them whatsoever. Just like you guys, I pay you guys a fee every month. There's no one pays me to talk about these things, but these are things that have really helped me. And the physical therapy was something that wasn't free, but it's damn near free, and it's not invasive at all. In fact, it makes me stronger as well. You know, it's strengthened the muscles that were otherwise neglected for most of my life because I spent 8 to 12 hours a day seated at a desk just typing away, right? And it made me realize that the lifestyle that I was leading was ostensibly healthy, but it certainly wasn't optimized for health. And just because it wasn't unhealthy doesn't mean that it was also healthy. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of where we are right now. We're becoming more and more aware of health. Like, no one thinks it's a good idea to smoke anymore. Even people who are smoking every day don't think it's a good idea, and don't think it's not a problem. But there's also the sitting every day, the excess amount of sugars, refined carbs that we're eating, like all this garbage that we're putting into our bodies, the seating, the lack, the seatedness, the lack of sleep. We're experiencing all of these sort of low level amounts of unhealth, for lack of a better term. And then what happens is you turn 35 like I did, and it has all culminated into this, right? Yeah. A life that I thought was relatively healthy all of a sudden came cascading down.
Yeah. And did you get a glimpse of your mortality as well? That was the one thing that motivated me. You realize that it's quite stoic, isn't it? Remember, you will die.
Yeah.
Like, you kind of like, I'm not getting any younger, and this is not getting any better. And I joke that I don't want to work with anyone that's younger than 35 because I feel like you have to have that glimpse of your mortality before you'll do all the things that we ask you to do.
Well, and it's this weird thing where I was somewhat at peace with that, but I also knew I didn't want to die. And if I was going to die, I didn't want to be in pain and suffering in the process, right? And by the way, like, I shouldn't be thinking about this at 35 of, oh crap, I really feel like this is it. This is the path I'm going down, and it's terrifying to me. Let's fix it. And if I don't want to go down that path, then I'm willing to do anything to change that. And I really think that's the insight. If I could give that to anyone who's listening to this, is you have to be willing to actually make the change. Yeah, it's important to work with people who are experts and not find the crystal healer who is going to sell you a bunch of lies, but find people who are going to be your advocates and be supportive of you in that process. So you all work with a lot of people, many of whom are athletes, but a bunch of different folks. And it seems to me that you found some significant commonalities. And are they commonalities in symptoms or problems, or what are a lot of the commonalities you deal with now?
So I think where we started is with Chris, who had his issues as an athlete, particularly, and then a lot of the things that you described, so issues with gut health, erectile dysfunction, all those associated brain fog, and then so I think initially the business was founded on people so endurance athletes with those kinds of symptoms. And actually you find that if you train the way you're told to train for endurance events, so this could be mountain biking or cycling or triathlon, which is basically quite attritional, it's go out and crush yourself as hard as you can, as often as you can, every day. And then in order to recover from that, you just have to eat a whole load of refined carbohydrates, Gatorade, cereal, pasta, bread.
They make sugar packs cyclists bring with them, right?
I used to be a dealer of that stuff. I had the wholesale account, and then I had my bike team, and I was the dealer. I was the one that put in the group order, and then everybody got the wholesale price. And I used to get back from every bike ride with this sticky ball of these wrappers of this stuff, and I'd use one of those every 40 minutes. And I absolutely had to have it, else I'd start to have some sort of hypoglycemic episode, or what felt like one, where you're dizzy and really hungry. It's ugly.
Yeah.
And when you do that, so there are some people who thrive in that environment and they do great, and that's fine. But it's a small percentage of the population, and everybody else ends up broken in some way or another. So I think that's sort of been a core of our clientele. Often endurance athletes, lots of triathletes, some runners. But then as the more we talk about this, and the more we look into hormones and the gut. So we have a lot of people who have gut issues. That's just what we talk about a lot, and that's who we seem to attract in terms of the people that work with us.
Now, when you say talk about, you guys have a podcast, Nourish, Balance, Thrive podcast. We'll put a link to that, Sean, if you put that in the show notes as well. But the thing I like about it is you touch on these different topics, so I don't have to listen to every episode, but there are ones that I always download each one, and then it's in my feed, and I'm like, oh yeah, I really want to hear that one, or that one's intriguing. I never even thought about that. And so you have these topics where I can dive a little bit deeper, and I feel like I get more than I would out of a TED Talk, but I also don't feel like I don't have to read a medical textbook in order to understand it. So thank you for your podcast. I appreciate that.
Well, sometimes you have to read a medical textbook. If I get really into it, then sometimes it will make people's eyes go crossed. But I try not to do that too frequently. But yeah, so basically now where we're at is we work with anybody who has a performance goal. And you might think of performance in terms of athletics. I want to run under 3 hours in a marathon, right? That would be an athletic performance goal. But for some people, it might be, I have a 5-year-old daughter. I want to be able to play with her. You know, I want to have the energy to spend time with my kids, or I want to actually be able to function at my desk for my job. That could be a performance goal. So
because I came to you and I wasn't an athlete at all. I was wondering, I wonder if these guys will even talk to me, right? And I realized that yes, performance can mean athletic performance, but it could just mean getting better so you can be your best self.
Yeah,
right. It's just a function that you're optimizing for. It could be anything.
Yeah. And so the hormone thing was something that was important because my hormones were all out of whack. I had I remember my human growth hormone was relatively low at the time, and I think that's why a lot of I was doing physical therapy every day, but it wasn't really sticking because I wasn't building up the musculature. And when we started fixing some of the gut stuff and through supplementation, I feel like eventually it all started clicking, and that back pain that went from a 10 to a 7 when I started doing physical therapy is now at roughly a 1 or a 0 most days.
It's amazing.
Awesome.
It's essentially gone, and I'm stronger than I ever was, and it's really simple sort of stuff, but I don't think that would have happened had my hormones stayed out of whack the whole time. But then, of course, my libido was through the floor. And now Bex has to fight me off every day. I can tell you the true sort of test here. There isn't. I mean, we can do the blood tests or whatever. That stuff's great. We were just talking about this last week, I think. The true test is how you feel. You need these markers to help understand that there's nothing that's radically wrong with you. But for me, it's my sex drive is through the roof. I feel way better than I did 2 years ago. I feel like to use a sports analogy, I started off with sort of the 1 yard line, and I was getting ready to get sacked for a safety. It was not going to be good. I don't know if this translates. I don't have any cricket analogies. I'm sorry, gentlemen.
That's fine. Cricket, you play for 5 days, and then it's a draw, so you can't quite have the same analogy.
So I felt like it was at the 1 yard line, and the thing I want to stress is I'm not 100% there. I feel like I'm 80 yards down the field, which is a significant improvement from where I was 2 years ago. And if you were to go back to my 35-year-old self and say, hey, if you put in an immense amount of work, you're going to get 80% better over the next 2 years, I would have said, hell yes. Like whatever I can do to get there. Also realizing I'm still headed in the right direction. And the changes from here are going to be especially incremental, because to get that last 20% is like figuring out what are the sort of edge cases, what are the slight tweaks that I need to make, because I've made all the dramatic tweaks and I've made a bunch of other small tweaks along the way as well. And so I still feel like I'm 80% of the way there. I still have some chemical sensitivities. They're considerably less than what they were, but I was at Podcast Sean's new apartment yesterday, and he just had it remodeled. And I walked in there, within half an hour I started getting a little sore throat and a little runny nose, and I'm like, oh, okay. Like I realized I still have some chemical sensitivities, right? And I still have some tiredness that I will experience, especially in the afternoons, even though I have a relatively low carbohydrate diet. It's not like I'm eating 3 bowls of rice for lunch and then crashing. Like I do get more tired than, say, my 31-year-old self did, and I bring my 31-year-old self up because to me that felt like the sort of peak health for me, even though there was a lot of stuff starting to go wrong. It's what felt like the most I was the most physically fit, but also like maybe most mentally sharp as well. And I feel like I'm getting really close to that, and what's exciting to me is to get back to that and then surpass it. And I feel like I can do that. I feel like I'm maybe a year or 2 years away from really surpassing that, and by the time I hit age 40 I will be sharper and fitter than I was at 30, and certainly than I was at 25, because I was fat and unhealthy at 25. I was working 80 hours a week and sleeping literally 3 or 4 hours a night every night, and I didn't realize how unsustainable that was. One of the things that you did help me adjust quite a bit was my sleep. And I had built up this weird pattern that was starting, I thought, to work for me. I would sleep 3 hours a night, 2 nights in a row, and then I would sleep 9 hours on the third night. I don't know why that worked for me at the time, but eventually it stopped working. And I realized that there were just a lot of small adjustments that I needed to make with screens and getting sunlight in the morning. Can we talk a little about some of those basic things that will help out with sleep quite a bit? Yeah. And why is sleep so important, and why do we neglect it so much?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about some of the practical concerns because I'm definitely living it, but Tommy's the neuroscientist. Perhaps you should talk about why sleep's so important.
Oh, well, there's both sides of that are very important, but in terms of the practicality and then the science. But so essentially, sleep is the only time that you have for a lot of the tissues in the body to repair. And that goes from the brain all the way out to the skin. So there's even some really interesting data on how light at the wrong time on the skin at night, when the skin is supposed to be repairing itself, that sort of predisposes you to things like skin cancers. So even like sleep and darkness at the right time, that's when the body repairs itself, essentially. That's when the brain flushes out all the stuff that's been accumulating during the day as you've been thinking and doing whatever it is that you do during the day. And in terms of the light exposure, there's 2 important parts to it. So there's sunlight during the day, and which helps time everything that happens in the body happens on what we call a circadian rhythm. So during circadia means roughly a day. So it happens at a specific time during the day, and there are hundreds of genes and proteins and things that your body makes in different amounts depending on the time of day. And the way that your body knows what time of day it is it should be sunlight, bright light during the day. And right now we're inside. This would be nowhere near enough light to set a circadian rhythm, even though it feels bright to us compared to what you get from sunlight. It's really nothing. It's a fraction. And then at night, you need darkness because that tells your body that it's nighttime, but you produce a hormone called melatonin, which some people may have taken to try and help them sleep because they spend their evenings staring at a screen which suppresses their body making melatonin. So blue and green lights, particularly, and the bright LEDs that we get on screens, phones and computer screens,
and
televisions, everything, it's really good at suppressing our melatonin production. And melatonin, so it times the clock, it sets our metabolism, but it also has some antioxidant effects, anti-cancer effects. They're using it in for studies to try and repair injured brains as part of cancer therapy. So melatonin has all these amazing effects, yet we're suppressing it by watching all these screens at night. And so the two ways to prevent that is to make sure we get sun during the day, which again sort of helps prime us to make melatonin at night, and then also just avoid those bright lights at night.
Yeah. And I've added a few things, and you and I talked about this a little bit, like a sleep mask and some earplugs and just some really basic things, but it had more to do with, I think, the practice of getting sunlight as soon as it's available. Mm-hmm. I tend to still wake up. I'm just an early bird, so like I still wake up before the sun is up, and so I got this thing called a human charger. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what the science is behind it. You've sent me a few studies on it, but what are your thoughts on sort of the artificial light from that?
So I think that can help. It's
if nothing else, it certainly gives me the placebo.
We're big fans of the placebo. If you can get a placebo from something that has literally zero downsides, that's great. If it makes you feel better, then
and it's not displacing something better.
And it's
that's
not
my
displacing
caveat.
something better. Yeah.
There you go.
But it's really good for jet lag in particular. So if you're trying to time your circadian rhythm to something that you're about to go to, or somewhere where you've just arrived, part of jet lag is the fact that your body has no idea what time of day it is, right? And so then the light in the day and darkness at night is a big part of that. So the human charger has some great evidence for that. But then for the same reason, if you're not going to be exposed to bright light, then making sure that your body is getting some of those cues at the right time, even if it's not from sunlight, I think can have a big benefit. So it makes sense.
Yeah, and I was living in Montana at the time too, so like all winter it's dark and cloudy, and the sun doesn't even come up until, I swear, it's, what does it show, like 10 a.m. or something crazy.
But it's still bright out though, right? Compared to what the light level of light that you experience indoors.
True.
You need to get a light meter out.
But sunrise wasn't until like 10 a.m. and I would get
really?
up. Yeah, I would get up at like 4 or 5 a.m.
Oh wow, okay.
And so even between, I'd have 5 hours between sunrise, even though it was cloudy. Yes, you would still have brightness, but it was diffused through many layers of clouds. Yeah. I mean, it's Canada basically, and so I mean, we're in California now, so I have a lot more sun, and I can tell you there has been a marked difference in my mood and Beck's. I mean, for whatever reason, I'm one of those people who is ultra sensitive to light. So I walk every day. I probably walk about 8 miles a day, and doing so in the sun, like there is this marked difference in my overall mood and happiness. And one of the things you and I talked about is sometimes it's just about changing your environment, and that might mean changing the geography altogether. I know when you moved, you kind of moved out into the middle of nowhere. I mean, part of that had to do with cycling, I assume, but the other parts, why the change in geography for you, and how does that translate to other people?
Well, actually, the main reason was to be closer to my wife's family. We had a baby, and it's really. I mean, this is another thing. I mean, all of these things, they revolve around this principle of ancestral health. Like, how can we recreate the lifestyle of the hunter-gatherer that lived 10,000 years ago as best we can, because they seem to have been the best humans that ever lived. So being part of that strong social group might be important. But then also
applying science.
Yeah, exactly.
To the ancestral health.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the straw man arguments against the paleo diet is, like these caricatures of like reenacting being a caveman, right? It's not a reenactment. It's just like what's the best we can do given what's available. What's appropriate is a very good word. And so that was partly to be closer to my wife's family, but yeah, it was. I must admit, it's very nice. I live in Bonnie Doon, which is just outside Santa Cruz, and I get tons of sunshine. There's Bonnie Doon manzanita trees and redwood trees, and we're 5 minutes from the ocean, and it's beautiful, and I'm very grateful for the amount of time that I can spend outdoors in nature in the sunshine, and I think my health has benefited from it greatly.
Yeah, and here's the weird thing. I remember when both of you recommended this, like I had just finished a tour, and you're like, okay, I think you should take a month and go live in the woods now.
See, you are a triathlete. This is exactly what triathletes do. They just like grind themselves into the floor until they got...
it's a different type of performance. Exactly. But we did, a 50-city tour, and afterward you were like, hey, I think that you should go live in the woods for a month. But for me, that sounds like hell. Like, I grew up really poor, and so I don't want to recreate that with camping. Our electricity got turned off all the time, and sometimes the water would stop running. That's because we didn't pay the bill. And so for me, like, I think going camping would really stress me out. And then we had this conversation about this, and you're like, okay, well, what would be the ideal sort of relaxing environment? And for me, it's like, it's coming to LA and just walking around the city for a while. And I think part of it has to do with like the psychology of the individual, because yes, I've lived in the middle of nowhere. When we first moved to Montana, we moved to this cabin in the middle of nowhere to write a book. We were there for 4 months, side of a mountain, Montana winter, and the only thing you can do is write, because it's negative 26 degrees when you wake up in the morning, and there's nothing else to do with your time, right? And so I would basically just write. And so I understand the sort of dynamic of isolation, but for me, what was best for my psychology was finding the right place.
Yeah, you were with your people here. I can see that.
Yeah, and it was finding, your own tribe, and I think that's going to be different for everyone. In fact, I think the first 7 or 8 times I came to Los Angeles, I didn't find the right people, and there's a certain stigma to Los Angeles. And yeah, if you're looking for that side of things, the self-absorbed egomaniacs and narcissists, you're going to find that. But guess what? You'll probably find that in Dayton, Ohio, too, if you're looking for it. But if you find, there's 20 million people in Southern California. If you can't find the right people, then, well, I don't think the problem. Yeah, exactly. So I can tell you it has been a marked difference in changing of geography for me. But I wanted to get into some questions we have from our audience. We usually do some voicemails, but today I wanted to go through my story instead of going through the voicemails. But I do have some questions. I reached out to our audience on social media. We usually call this the lightning round, but because Ryan and I usually answer these questions with a short, shareable, less than 140 character response. Wow. But we're not going to do that today.
This is why I don't like Twitter. I can't do it.
You can maunder on a bit, and then maybe if we have something really pithy that is shareable, we'll write it down in the show notes or something. For those of you who want to share it, we're on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter at The Minimalists. By the way, I wrote this down. I wanted to get to it. I said, is social media fucking us?
Yes.
And I wanted to get like from a health perspective, because I've found it to be both wildly helpful and wildly intrusive simultaneously. Now, we started using social media radically differently this year. We wrote this whole sort of mini manifesto of how we're going to use, because I found what we were doing up until this year is we weren't being very intentional about how we were using social media. It was like, I'll post a picture on Instagram and then repost it on Twitter and then repost it on Facebook, and it was like those carbon copies where you sign something in triplicate. And I'm like, this is literally the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over. Why am I doing this? Like, why am I not using these platforms more intentionally? So we started using the platforms a lot more intentionally. Like, Instagram's really good for sharing beautiful photos, and Facebook was really good for sharing links to interesting and informative articles, and Twitter is good for sharing words. And so that's how we started using these. And we provided these sort of creative limitations that have helped us use them better. But the question for me is still, like, how useful is it? A friend of mine is a guy named Cal Newport. Are you guys familiar with him? He wrote a book called So Good They Can't Ignore You. Also another one called Deep Work.
Yeah, that's the one I know. Yeah, I definitely heard that name. I haven't read it, but
and he has a great TED Talk called Quit Social Media.
Okay.
And he's a professor at Georgetown. We had him on the podcast at a live event we did in Washington, D.C. And the thing that he talks about is how social media for most people is a net negative. And for me, I think right now it is a net positive, but I don't know whether or not I'm just tricking myself. Mm-hmm. So I'd love to know what you guys think about it from a health perspective.
I think there's 2 parts to it. So like we mentioned earlier, nothing is good and bad, right? Everything is shades of grey,
right?
At least 50 of them. Sorry. But so on the good side is so the kind of stuff that we do. So say if you have, or in that world, say you have a specific health problem, or you have a specific thing you're trying to do, be it a specific diet or some problem you're trying to solve, you can find a group of people who have the same issues, have done it before, have loads of advice, can be supportive, because you might not be able to get that same support and knowledge from your local community, right? It might just be there just aren't that many people around you who have this specific autoimmune condition, or who want to try a paleo or a ketogenic diet or go vegan, right? You might not have that tribe. So you can get access to that tribe, and it can be very rewarding and very supportive. So that's one positive. On the other side, particularly with younger people, we see more and more that social media use is connected to mental health problems. And it makes perfect sense, because A, it's replacing real human connection, which is incredibly important. You know, spending time with your family and your friends in real life, outdoors, doing something beneficial to yourself or somebody else. And
it apes the form of connection without really providing that
yeah, so you think you're connected. I have 1,000 friends. Look how connected I am. They're not connections. You're like, if you needed help from these people, how many of them are going to give it? If you needed true support, how many of them are going to give it? And it's a very small fraction. And so, at the same time, you're constantly comparing yourself, right? So I was reading the other day about how, there's a good point where when you were at school, right? So maybe school sucked and you were bullied, but then at 3:30 you go home and you don't have to think about those kids until the next morning. Now they're on Facebook, they're on Twitter. You see them 24 hours a day. Like you just cannot escape.
They're bullying you at midnight now.
Yeah, exactly. That you cannot escape being bullied, and it's continuous. And at the same time, you see these other people who are in your class, and they have all this stuff, and they look happy all the time, and you're just it's a constant setup for you to think of yourself as a failure, and that kind of spiral downward. So can be beneficial, can be negative, and the science that's coming out now, just starting, I think, because we've only just had sort of the tip of the iceberg of the social media boon and then the downstream effects. But overall, again, particularly for young people, really seems to be having a net negative effect.
Yeah, and I don't know what the answer is yet. I mean, I can say use it more deliberately. I don't know what the broader answer is, but I think the individual answer is assessing what our needs are, and then what is appropriate for me, and then also building up these either disciplines, but also maybe self-imposed constraints. So we were talking about the constraints earlier, but I don't have social media on my phone. And it's not because I believe that Instagram is inherently evil. It's because I don't trust myself with, I will, as soon as I'm in line at Chipotle, it's the first thing I will do is just pull out my phone, and I'll be one of the other 15 people who's staring at the screen sort of mindlessly, and not getting the value from that I would by maybe just pausing and thinking, or maybe opening up my Kindle app and reading a book. There are alternatives that are better alternatives, and without completely leaving it behind and being a total Luddite, I don't think that's what any of us are prescribing either. But I think it's about finding the discipline to use these things responsibly in a way that allows us to get value from it, and not just pretend we're getting value from it, not just to pacify ourselves with it.
Talk about the cognitive middle gear, Tommy. That's a very interesting thing to do.
Yeah, so this is something that I guess I learned about from a friend of mine, James Hewitt, who works for a company that I help consult with. They work both with corporate clients, and then they also do a lot of the coaching for Formula One drivers. That's kind of their blue ribboned business. And he has talked a lot about there's something called the cognitive middle gear. So if you imagine you have 3 gears, and it's the same for sports. So that's something that a lot of our clients understand, is you can do the long, slow aerobic. Maybe you go for a brisk walk or a jog. You can do that for maybe hours at a time. If you just sort of keep going, it's nice and leisurely. You're not really punishing the body. Then you have the high gear, which is like sprinting, and you just go and you're very intentional and you work very hard for a short period of time. And then there's the middle gear, which is actually where most athletes are taught to train, and actually it's what really does them the most harm is basically just crushing yourself for long periods of time, like 30 minutes or an hour. That's how people think they should train, right?
So if a sprint is a 10 out of 10, the middle gear is a
like
7
or an 8.
Yeah,
Exactly.
so if you can do it for half an hour, I know you're not sprinting, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And people do that. They're like
Usain Bolt or something.
Yeah.
Like 3 people in the world.
Well, actually, he just sprints for 15 seconds, then eats some chicken nuggets. But or 10.59 seconds, I think it is. Anyway, but so people, when they think that they're going to train, what they're going to do is they're going to go out and I'm just going to run as hard as I can for an hour. And that's like absolutely the worst way to train. But it's also the worst way to use your brain. So if you have the cognitive low gear, so that's exactly like sitting and thinking, contemplating, just letting your mind wander, that's when you get your best ideas. But we don't really let ourselves do that. And then there's the high gear, which is where,
can I stop you on that for a second?
Yeah.
Because I don't know if I wrote... Yeah, I did write this down. Attention span. Man, like we talked about sharpness a moment ago, right? And I feel less sharp than I did at age 31 still. I feel leaps and bounds. I like infinitely better than I was 2 years ago when I first made that phone call to you. But I don't feel as sharp as I did at 31. But I feel like I'm getting close to that. But maybe one of the problems is I listen to too many podcasts.
Yeah. So this is, and I'm certainly guilty of that too. I have a free moment. What can I do in this free moment? I can, a podcast is the perfect way. I can put more information into my brain, which is definitely probably not what I need. Probably not what I need right now. And so what you should be doing again is long periods of that, low gear where the mind is just allowed to, getting bored allows you to come up with all kinds of great ideas. That doesn't happen anymore. But when you want to achieve something, you do this high gear, high focus, intentional, no distractions, you get stuff done. But what we spend most of our time doing is we spend time in the middle gear, which is I'm working on this project. Oh wait, I'm going to check my email. Oh look, Facebook, I just got a notification on my phone. And you're constantly being bombarded. There's constantly stuff coming in, but you're never actually intentionally doing something. It's just like this continuous load of information that you cannot actually ever process. That's the cognitive middle gear, and that's what we spend most of our time doing, continuously task switching and never focusing on one thing.
And then giving up that opportunity to say you stood in line waiting for coffee or something. Well, that's an opportunity to be in the very lowest gear, right?
Yeah.
But people don't do that anymore. They're I'm going to go into the middle gear and I'm just going to scroll through a news feed right now rather than...
Well, and while the TV is on... In fact, did you guys ever see Back to the Future Part 2? The classic Michael J. Fox film. So it takes place in far in the future in 2015, and so this is like mid 80s, right? So it's like 30 years in the future.
I never thought about that.
And so it's 2015, and there is this scene. Oh my God! It obviously they never get the future sort of technology right, and so they just sort of iterate on what the existing technology is. So there's still fax machines and televisions, but he's watching television and it's voice commanded, so it's like the sort of Siri, Alexa equivalent, and he turns it on and he has six channels playing at once on the same TV. And that seems to be the perfect metaphor for what we're doing now. Yeah. We're listening to a podcast while on Twitter watching the television and the radio is playing at the same time. It's 6 different channels, but they're just coming from these different sources. And you're right. If there's a free moment, I will put on a podcast and man, I mean, there are some days, because I'm extremely introverted, so I spend most of my time alone, but am I really spending my time alone?
You're not alone.
Yeah, and so I may not be around other people where it's not a two-way communication, right? But it's sort of this seeping in. I remember David Foster Wallace, my favorite writer. He the reason he said he didn't have internet at home is he said, if I can get out, they can get in. And he didn't mean it in some like government conspiracy way. He meant like they can get in, and oh my God, you guys are blowing my mind right now, because when I was 31, I did these series of weird experiments, because I don't think minimalism is about deprivation, but sometimes I'll temporarily deprive myself of something to see whether or not it's truly adding value to my life. So what I'm thinking about right now is, let's get rid of podcasts for the next week. Well, how is that going
just
to
not
hurt?
Mine.
Yeah. Just,
all of them but mine.
Yeah, or mine. Yeah, we're just gonna nourish, balance, thrive, and the minimalist, and that's it. No, actually, we actively encourage people to unsubscribe and unfollow us on social media. It's this ongoing thing where, like, if we're not adding value to your life anymore, please don't feel compelled to do it.
Right.
But yeah, if you do feel compelled, then yeah, feel free to subscribe until you stop getting value from it. That's okay too. And what I'm thinking though is when I was 31, I moved. I was trying to get out of debt, so I moved into this really small apartment in Dayton, Ohio, second most affordable city in the country. And I was a $500 apartment in a very nice neighborhood in Dayton. And I moved in there, and it was during the weekend, so I didn't have internet that weekend. And come Monday, I'm getting ready to call the internet company. I'm like, maybe I can go without home internet for a month just to test it out, see what happens, right? No internet at home. Now, keep in mind, I also make a living online. But I'm like, I'll try it out for a month. And a month went by, and it was the most productive month I'd ever had, because a month earlier, a couple months earlier, I guess, when I moved out, my marriage ended. I just never got another TV. I didn't bring a TV back into my life, and I was completely fine without it. I rediscovered these things called books, and they're amazing. And then I moved, and I didn't have internet, and then a couple months later, I said, okay, I'm going to go without my phone for 60 days. And the first thing you learn is there aren't very many payphones anymore. But also you learn the special kind of loneliness, because you come home and all the pacifiers are gone. My TV isn't there. My internet isn't there, so I can't check the likes and the tweets and the news. And then my phone isn't there. Oh my God, what am I going to do with my time? Well, I guess I'll read or I'll write. I'll create something. And it was truly the most productive time in my life. We wrote drafts for all 4 of our books. I have 1 novel and then 3 books that Ryan and I wrote together during this period of time, going without internet. And it started with that phone. I eventually brought the phone back into my life, but used it in a much more deliberate way, like to actually make phone calls. I mean, it's a weird thing. We call it a phone, but it's basically a pocket computer, right? And it's a distraction machine. And what I'm realizing right now is, wow, I am distracted in ways that crept back into my life, and it's making me start to reevaluate some of those distractions. So
it's interesting to notice that you said earlier, my attention isn't as good as it was when I was 31. And then you said, when I was 31, I didn't have internet and I didn't have my phone at home. And all of a sudden, the pieces start to sort of fall into place.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's hard to sometimes find these correlations until you step back and have these conversations. I think that's why these kinds of conversations are so important. I do spend about 90% of my time alone, but it makes the other 10 to 20% of the time where I'm with people. It makes these I have these kinds of conversations all the time. I feel like I wish I brought a microphone with me all the time, because the conversations I tend to have are more meaningful. As a result, we can start, and I'm happy to scrutinize my own life all the time and say, hey, I'm far from perfect. Let me figure out what's wrong so I can improve on it incrementally.
And it's the example that you're setting for your kid as well is something I think about a lot now. If you don't want your kids to spend all of their time scrolling through a newsfeed, then why are you teaching them to do it by doing it yourself, right? You lead by example. Yeah, well, there's one thing I've been doing recently that has helped me out a lot. I wrote an essay about this. Sean, if you put a link to it in the show notes, it has to do with, if you and I are sitting at a table for dinner, right? All 3 of us are just seated at the table, we're having dinner, and I get a phone call, and it's a phone call I have to take right now. I'm going to say, excuse me while I take this phone call, and I'm going to step outside. I'll be over here, and I'm going to be on the phone way over here somewhere, right? But we don't do the same thing for text messages. We just break out the phone. Yeah. Oh yeah. Go ahead and keep talking to me. Yep. That's fine. And I'm definitely listening.
And for those of you watching this on the video podcast, you can see I just pull my phone out and you guys, and I'm like fake nodding, like And so what I started doing now, like there are times where I absolutely have to like write something down, or something's gonna break me away from the conversation. And if I know that it's essential, what I'll say is, hey, please excuse me for a minute while I take this message. And it makes me realize, like, okay, am I actually gonna excuse myself from the table to do this? Yeah. I'll do this at home now too. So be me and Bex and Ella, we're eating dinner together. I'll say, hey, can you excuse me for a second? I really need to send a message right now while I'm remembering it. Or can you excuse me for a second? I really need to go write something down so I can remember it later. And that way I can be fully engaged in this conversation. And people are really understanding when you do that because it's almost weird to them, right? Because we become so accustomed to having these barriers in front of us. I'm just holding this machine between us, and we've created these metaphorical but also literal barriers in our everyday conversations, and talk about, I mean, the attention span now, the study I read recently, and maybe you have more information about this, is 8 to 59 seconds. The average American attention span. So I don't know how they measure that, but I know that even me, I'm someone who can get pretty obsessive and deeply focused in things. I have OCD, like legitimately will get super obsessed. I'm more obsessive than I am compulsive, but I will have tunnel vision. Whereas Ryan, if he were here today, you know, he's like, oh, butterfly, and I'm OCD, he's ADD is the inside joke. And it makes for this interesting dynamic, but even with me, I've noticed this cultural ADD has infected me as well, right? Because it's become commonplace, and it's almost like I've just followed suit, and it makes reading books harder. It makes doing the deep work as Cal Newport, which I strongly recommend that book if you haven't checked it out. It'll make you just sort of re-question everything that it doesn't have to do with like really hunkering down and creating the optimal space for doing the best work, and work that you can be proud of. You know, I look back at all the deep work I've done from years past, and those are the things I'll look back on and say, oh, those are like, they're assets in a way. Like I wrote that book, or we made this film. And it was a lot of work, but it was a lot of really focused work. And there was super attention paid to that. Not perfection, but putting your best foot forward and getting into that creative state and really doing it. So I think there's something to be said for that. And our attention is slowly eroding, but I don't think it has to.
Yeah, I wonder how much of it has a biological underpinning, right? Are we just seeing on social media, you know, the shorter and shorter videos? It used to be 3 minutes, wasn't it? It was the average YouTube clip, and now, like as you say, it's like down to less than a minute now.
Yeah. And there was Vine. Remember Vine? That platform. There were 6-second videos. Oh yeah. And that I mean, although Vine is gone, it's essentially the same thing with Instagram and all these other platforms that are like, give me, and by the way, it's all done so that advertisers can aggregate more eyeballs onto their product or service, right?
Right.
And so give me 15 seconds of your attention right now.
Right.
As if it's but is it the most important thing in the moment? Usually not.
I just want, I mean, so there's probably some sort of loop here, right, where the short videos are creating its short attention span, but I wonder how much of it are other problems, like people are not well slept, they're not in a strong social support group, they're eating crappy food, they're not moving, and they don't get any sunshine, and therefore all they're capable of is 12 seconds of attention or whatever it is, right? So whether, you know, how much of it has a biological underpinning is my question.
Yeah, and it's this downward spiral, right? That you don't even notice that you're falling as well, because that's one of the symptoms of,
because the people that make these apps, they just follow the incentives, right? They've probably got some metric on the back end there. They call it a multi-arm bandit. You know, it's like a randomized control trial with 800 different arms, and they're like, oh, this is the one, right? Let's go do that. You know, that they're just following what works.
Well, I've got some questions here from our audience. I figured we'd dive into some of those. Natalie is asking, is there a link between excess material possessions and an increase in mental health issues? And so I tweeted something about this not that long ago. And so if we were to give a lightning round answer, my pithy answer would be excess is a sign of instability. And I had someone say, well, as if I meant mental instability. And actually, I didn't. I think there are a bunch of other. If we're having excess, means often we're unstable in a whole bunch of areas of our life. It could be relationships. It could be health instability. It could be creative instability, career instability, financial instability. And we try to compensate. We try to fill a void by having the material things. And you probably know about the chimp studies where if you give a chimpanzee a banana, they eat the banana. If you give them enough bananas for them to eat and share with the chimps around them, they will share. If you give them a horde of bananas, they will fight other chimps to the death to protect their horde, which is just going to rot. They're not even going to be able to eat all these bananas. And I'm wondering quite often, do we do the same thing? Do we have this sort of irrational desire to consume? You know, before this we were talking about Chris D'Elia referring to consumerism as sort of that people being barracudas, like being attracted to the next shiny object. Yeah. But do you think there's any tie to sort of this desire to increase our status or material wealth with mental health issues?
Yeah, I think it's difficult to figure out what's chicken and egg, but you say instability, I also think of uncertainty. So being anytime you're uncertain of anything, you will sort of hold on to anything which may give you some certainty, or you're uncertain about whether you'll need that in the future. So I'm just going to have it anyway, just in case, right? That's just in case.
The three most dangerous words in the English language.
But there's where I was going with that is somewhere that I can't remember now. So,
so I actually wrote this down here. You've got this is according to the Happy Planet Index. The 2 least happy countries in the world are Chad and Luxembourg. So, for 2 utterly different reasons, I'm assuming, right? Chad is like, talk about true instability or true uncertainty. There's a threat of violence at every moment of every day, asleep or awake, if you're living in Chad. Luxembourg is probably, I think, the richest per capita country in the world.
And they get paid the most for the least amount of work. I just read that this week, actually.
Well, there you go. And we're talking, so there, you can have, yes, with a certain level of uncertainty, you're going to feel instability, and that's probably going to lead to some sort of mental health problems as well, especially a dissatisfaction in life. No question about that. In fact, when you look at a lot of these depression surveys, sadness surveys, least happy country surveys, the war-torn countries tend to be at the bottom of the list, the least happy places, right? But then there are also like these weird anomalies like Luxembourg or the United States where people have, by and large, material wealth relative to places like Chad or Rwanda, but the amount of dissatisfaction, I think a lot of it has to do with being comparing ourselves to each other, the competitive nature of consumerism in a way.
Yeah, that's the thing that I was going to mention, was that there are so many things that we do with our environment that create the physiology of uncertainty. So if it's the diet that you're eating increases some kind of systemic inflammation, we know that that's in certain subsets of depression. Inflammation is directly linked. So if the diet is inflammatory, that's going to cause or can cause in susceptible people depression. That makes you feel uncertain. So could that then in order to get some of those beneficial feelings, retail therapy could be one of those things.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So that's been in my past as well. When I was feeling at my worst, sat at a desk at a hedge fund with plenty of disposable income, but feeling like death, no girlfriend, brain fog, I would self-soothe with a lot of things, including retail therapy. It was very easy to go onto the internet and research a new product and then buy it from Amazon.com. And sometimes the stuff would turn up and I wouldn't even remember what I ordered, like even though I'd spent 2 days researching it before I bought it.
And there's a certain amount of dread. You see the box show up and you're like, what did I do?
Yeah, have this really sheepish relationship with the person that took the deliveries at the hedge fund, because you're like, oh no, I guess I did do that or something else. But I self-soothe with a lot of things. I self-soothe with sugar and the internet and bike racing and all kinds of things. It's just there's something wrong with you. And
how do we stop that? How do we stop the self-soothing? Like, what are the steps?
Well, it's like any problem. Like I said at the beginning, you have to find out what's causing the problem in the first place. If you want to solve any problem, you have to know what caused it. I can't think of many examples where you can
just punish yourself because you like to do retail therapy. Figure out what it is that makes you feel the way that then needs you to do that.
Is it a sunlight deficiency?
It could be a sunlight deficiency, or it could be a social connection deficiency, and so that was another thing that creates uncertainty, is that we are wired to feel the same, to be part of a tribe. And when you're continuously exposing yourself, so social media is the perfect example, to all these other people who look better or they're different, at least you know that you feel different from them.
It's the highlights reel, right? It's not necessarily reflective of what's really going on. You don't
feel part of the group. You don't feel like you're the same as anybody else, and feeling different, again, that drives physiological changes again in the brain, in our immune system, that then has those same downstream effects. So it could be so many different things in the environment that make you feel different or make you feel uncertain, and then that can drive whatever then the behavior is, be it shopping or buying things.
Simon has this really interesting technique that I think is worth mentioning. Simon is
he's on your team. I've talked to him.
So I'm very lucky that I've added some quite brilliant people over the last few years, and Simon is one of them. He's a professor of public health and a performance psychologist. He works with the World Tour cycling team, Team BMC, and with some of the athletes that he works with, he has them break that horrible constant comparison thing on social media by having people reach out to the person, so you're seeing this highlights reel of somebody else's life. Oh, this woman is the best cyclist that ever lived. She has the nicest, cleanest bikes. Her family is so perfect. I bet she gets 8.5 hours of sleep every night. She has the most perfect diet. No, reach out to that woman, connect with her, go for a bike ride with her, and the chances are she's going to tell you, no, my life is just as much of a disaster as yours. It's just the only thing I post on social media is the highlights reel.
Yeah.
And it just breaks that illusion immediately, and suddenly you get it. So I know that's a technique that he uses with the people he works with that people might find helpful.
Yeah, I think realizing that what we see on TV and then online is a construct. And I think there's nothing wrong with putting your best foot forward. I think quite often we want to do that. Like, I want this to be a good podcast episode. I want to put my best foot forward here.
Right.
But also realizing that that's what other people are doing, is they're putting their best foot forward. It's not the total picture, right? If you pose for a picture, you go to Sears and they get the portraits there, right? They don't just say, give me an ugly face or a scowl. They say smile, right?
Yeah.
And so just realize that that's what people are doing. They're posing for a picture.
And I don't think there's anything inherently wrong. And these are his words as well, actually, I should make clear, is that there's nothing wrong with comparison per se. Like, that's how humans make meaning of something, right? If you just found out, I don't know, maybe you play some game and you get a score, you don't know what that score means until you compare it to somebody else's score. And so that's how humans find meaning in anything. So there's nothing wrong with comparison per se. Like, you're going to compare yourself with somebody else on the internet.
Right.
Well, you're doing that all the time. That's how we find meaning in things, especially things with a number associated with them.
So where does it go wrong? Because I'm thinking
when you're comparing with someone's highlights reel all the time, like, this is my PR. I just PR'd this deadlift and I'm going to put it on Instagram, and you're just getting started and you can barely lift the bar. In fact, you're not even sure your form is right and you're a bit worried about throwing your back out.
Yeah.
And here's this picture of this super muscle guy lifting 500 pounds or something and doing it flawlessly.
Sure.
Like,
This is what makes me so mad about health coaches, performance coaches, even doctors who feel the need to post naked or topless selfies on social media when, like, literally that has never helped anybody ever. I'm fairly certain.
It's not terribly inspiring.
It's not terribly inspiring. And, like, that's certainly something that many people in our company could do, but it literally benefits nobody. Like, everybody has a different history. Everybody has a different starting point. There's absolutely nothing about the person looking at that that's the same as what you were at whatever given point that allows them to then use you as inspiration, because everything's different. So all it does is set you up for failure. The people who do that, even those who are ostensibly, helping others with their health, that just makes me really mad. I think it's completely unnecessary.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about my partner, Bex. I mean, she has just phenomenal genetics on top of having she's a dietitian. So she's really helped me out, partnering with you all, going through all these health problems, like just having her there to be really supportive, but also understanding. And she understands about nutrition really well, but she also has really great genetics. and I can't plan to have a 6-pack abs like her, even though, that's just obviously the lifestyle that she lives and leads lends itself to that, but also a lot of it is she was born with that, and she unless she were really screw it up, she's going to look great on her own, right? And I think what you're talking about is you have some person who's posting the shirtless picture, and either they're on just dramatic amounts of steroids, and that's never part of the diet plan that's an exercise plan that's recommended, and it's a misrepresentation. I think about we're getting ready to go on this tour, a 3-city tour. I've learned my lesson on the 50-city tours. We're doing 3 cities this time.
I heard it on the podcast. I was like, oh no, he's going to go back to square one. Oh no, it's only 3 cities. Yeah. He's going to do it all in 3 days. It's perfect.
That's right. So it's called the Simply Southern Tour. We're talking about money and minimalism, and
you minimalized your tour dates.
That's right.
Important, yeah.
And we're doing it in the South. Dave Ramsey, I don't know if y'all are familiar with Dave, but he's got a big radio show, and we're going out with his team that's just talking about money and minimalism. But his daughter is doing our Nashville event with us in July, and she has a book called Live Your Life, Not Theirs. And I'm sorry, it's actually called Love Your Life, Not Theirs. And I think that's really what you're trying to convey here is you can look at someone else's life and you can say, oh, that's an interesting ingredient. I never thought about incorporating that into my life. That could make my life better potentially. Yeah. And bring that into your life. But it's really about creating your own recipe and loving your life, not their life. And I think that's the one thing with social media where I'm endlessly scrolling and I'm like a zombie lost in the glowing screen. That's when it becomes problematic. Let's see. We got a question here from Joshua Hook. Joshua asks, what's the best way to support someone dealing with a serious health problem? For example, cancer or MS or Lyme disease. My pithy answer here is the road to support is paved with understanding. And I'll just expand on that a little bit. When Bex and I first started dating was sort of at the beginning of where my health was really starting to decline, and she was like, I mean, she was weary for sure, like, what is going on? I really care about you, I love you, but I'm really worried about you too. But she worked really hard to understand what was going on, and throughout all of the difficult moments, she didn't baby me, or there was no sort of infantile treatment of my symptoms or whatever. But she worked really hard to understand what was going on, so that she could try to sympathize with what I was going through. So for you all, what are some of the best ways if Joshua Hook here is dealing with a friend or a loved one who has cancer or MS or Lyme disease, what can he do to best support that person?
Well, I think a big part of it is understanding what the person's going through on a technical basis. If that person is spending a good amount of their time on the internet researching their condition, the chances are they're learning some useful information, and that we get that all the time with people we work with. They come to us and they perhaps know more about their situation than we do. Which is a really interesting thing, and I think, you know, supporting someone like that might be a helpful thing to do to kind of match them with that level of understanding of the specific condition, so that you can have a meaningful conversation with them.
You can be on the same page as opposed to just placating them with niceties. Yeah, they're going to start
talking to you, and you won't understand what the hell they're talking about, and so it's very difficult to have a conversation. And of course, the person who's ill will immediately pick up on that and like, oh, what's the point of talking to you? You don't even understand what I'm going through, you know. So I think that might be an important thing.
I think being an ally in whatever it is that they're trying to do is very important. So say all of the conditions that were mentioned, you could try certain lifestyle factors, be they dietary or environmental, and, you know, as much as you can, doing that with them, I think is super important, because the number of times you see one person in a family decides to eat a certain way, and then the rest of the family just continues to eat the way that they were eating before, and all of a sudden you've just isolated this person. And then, you know, if they're dealing with a serious condition at the same time, plus they're being isolated, have to do everything else differently, I think that's, you know, it's very difficult to then balance out the pros of what they're trying to do versus the cons of then, you know, being isolated from other members of the family. So if everything can be done as a team, I think that's going to make a big difference. And then, you know, something that we maybe don't do enough of is whenever somebody's really struggling to deal with something and they tell you about it, you know, there's people are kind of split into two groups, but half, say if it's 50% of people, will try and offer solutions. So if somebody's really struggling with something, be it, you know, so say it's a disease, and they're sort of they just need to offload, talk about it, and then they don't necessarily need solutions from you. They just need to know that you're there for them. So you just need to say, man, that really sucks, I'm sorry. And so rather than trying to...
such a problem I have is and I know this, I've gotten way better, and especially in my current relationship, but I'm a problem solver, and so like I just want to show up and say, well, here's the 7 steps to fix exactly what. And Beck's like, hey, shut the fuck up and listen to me for a minute. I just want you to listen, and I think that is so key. Like sometimes it's just listening and not just nodding your head along and say but trying to understand what they're going through just by listening. And if they really want some solutions,
they'll ask for them.
They'll ask. Yes. Joshua Hook also asked, how can we take responsibility for our health but not obsess about it? And my short answer to this is obsession is helpful until it's no longer useful. Like sometimes I actually think obsession can for me, I got really, when we first started talking, I got really obsessed with, okay, I need to fix this, right? But there's a certain level of obsession that is endless rumination that doesn't do anybody any good. It's just me being neurotic about it.
You're having the same thought over and over again, right? You're just going around in circles.
Exactly. And so there was a level of obsession that allowed me to get really deep and get committed to fixing this, I think. But there becomes a time where it's like, okay, I know what I need to do now. I can give myself permission to stop obsessing over it, or this endless worry. If you give up worry, there's nothing to worry about, would be another pithy answer for you. What do you guys think about that?
I personally, I found habits incredibly useful. There's a really good book by Charles Duhigg that Simon often recommends to our clients on why habits are important, how you form them. And then you just don't think. I do stuff without thinking about it. Like if someone was to observe me from the outside during my day, they'd be like, that's weird. Like, why is he doing that? Why is he doing that? Why is he eating this? Like, why did he go to bed so early? Why did he have dinner at 4:00 in the afternoon? Those are not conscious decisions that my family is making every day. All those things are now on autopilot, right? So the premise of the book is, you probably remember a time when you reversed your car out the driveway and it took an awful lot of the prefrontal cortex, right? You're using higher order reasoning to understand how to get this thing out into the road. And then, the 10th time you do it, it's on autopilot, and you can have your kid in the back talking to you and listen to the radio whilst reversing the car out. And so the same is true of anything. You can put these things onto a habit. So they're basically on autopilit, So every time I boil the kettle, I do 10 press ups, and it's just something that happens automatically. I'm not depleting willpower in order to make that happen. So habits to me are really useful.
The way that I approach it, I guess, is probably similar to one of your your pithy response, and which is that I think you should fix the things that you can fix or that you're willing to fix, and then don't worry about it. So, for instance, one thing that I've done recently is I bought a reverse osmosis water filter for my house because I'm fairly concerned about some of the things that end up in the municipal water supply.
Okay.
And I am willing to buy a water filter so that most of the water that I drink is filtered. The other water that I drink out in the world, don't worry about it. I have literally no control over that. I've done the 80% or more. I know that's going to have a net benefit. The other stuff, just don't worry about it. And I think you can apply that to pretty much everything, be it your food or other aspects of your environment. Fix what you can fix and what you're willing to fix, and then beyond that, it's definitely not worth worrying about it. And worrying about it is actually going to be detrimental.
Yeah, it's the old Serenity prayer. I grew up Catholic, and like my mom used to always have her rosary beads out and praying give me the courage to change the things like can change.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing, and that is filtered water, by the way. So you're safe. You're safe with us.
But I wasn't worried about it.
Is something that's not under our control anymore. Is Wi-Fi, right? So we work with a lot of people that are worried about that, but there's not a great deal that you can do if you live in LA, for example. In London, you put on your phone and there's like 25 Wi-Fi networks. So even if you could turn it off,
you can move out to your house, basically.
Yeah, you can. My Wi-Fi signal is the only signal, but then you might create a social isolation problem, right? So it's like, which is the worst thing? But understanding what's under your control, I think, is very important.
Ruffalo asks, how can I safely recover from burnout? My pithy answer is extinguish the fire before rebuilding your home. I think that's one thing that I did struggle with when you and I first talked, was like, I didn't feel like I was burnt out, even though maybe I was to a certain degree, because I was moving from inertia, right? And so I was still continuing to, of course we'll go on another 50 city tour, it's not a problem. And then I realized pretty quickly, if I really want to get this under control, I do need to put out the fire before I start rebuilding this home, right? There's a line from our book, Everything That Remains. It's actually in the documentary. There's a scene, I'm out in the salt flats and I'm reading from it. My marriage ends, my mom dies, and the line from the book is, even while Rome is burning, there's somehow time for shopping at IKEA. and that was the thing. And I have nothing against IKEA. It's completely fine if you want, cheap breakable furniture. But the problem with IKEA wasn't IKEA. The problem was me. It was like, there's all the house is still burning, and I'm trying to rebuild it as I'm not dealing with the actual problem. I'm covering it up by buying the nice accoutrements that are going to make my new space look hospitable, I guess. So how do you all, when you talk to folks about burnout, what do you talk about? I mean, you often hear this term adrenal fatigue, which I think is overused. And I think there is a such thing as adrenal fatigue, but I think we often use it as we use it to just explain exhaustion. And can you maybe differentiate?
Yeah. So adrenal fatigue is a It's now the artist formerly known as adrenal fatigue.
We don't say that anymore.
We don't say that anymore. We call it hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis dysfunction, which is a lot more of a mouthful. But it's interesting because the original thought process, which came largely from work by Hans Selye, who was a physiologist who essentially, they say, would have won a Nobel Prize if he hadn't come up with this idea. But it basically, eventually, so if you're stressed, you make cortisol. That's your stress hormone. And then eventually you get to a point where you make so much cortisol that your adrenals get fatigued and they stop being able to make cortisol. And that,
I've heard people refer to this as hypocortisolism.
Yes. So there is a thing. There is a thing called hypocortisolism. There is something which is very dangerous called Addison's disease, where basically your adrenal glands, for various potential reasons, just stop making cortisol at all, and that can lead to death very quickly. But when you look at, but in reality, like your adrenals could still make cortisol if they were given the right inputs, right? It's not that they just don't work anymore. It's for some reason your body has decided that making more or less cortisol isn't a good idea, and there's many different inputs into that system.
And that was a problem I had when we did those first tests. My cortisol levels were really low.
Low cortisol is a real thing, and it does make people feel bad, but there's nothing wrong with your adrenal glands, right?
And when people are fatigued, they may have high cortisol, they may have low cortisol, there are lots of different tests you can do where you try and stimulate the adrenal glands to make cortisol. And people who have fatigue, some of them are high, some of them are low. You cannot just say it's adrenal fatigue. It may, in some cases there may be low cortisol being produced, but again, you have to work your way back. It's not just because they're tired, right? There's some kind of reason why that's happening.
Okay, so if someone's dealing with burnout, what do you recommend to them?
I mean, it's my default answer, isn't it? You have to understand what caused the burnout in the first place, don't you?
Yeah.
I think completely taking a step back, what we like to do is look inside. So we do a fair amount of testing. We've actually reduced the amount of testing that we do up front, because so much of the stuff that benefits people is the lifestyle interventions. We talk about diet and sleep, and so stress is super important. Like, where are your stresses coming from? Many people, their stressor may be that cognitive middle load, like they're just 12 hours a day at work, just continuously never processing anything properly, but it's just like stuff is coming in continuously. That's a stressor on the body. So figuring out where, what the issue is, and then also figuring out what it is that you can actually stop doing, or you don't need to do, or what you can change. And actually, for a lot of us feel like all the stuff that we do is super essential, but in reality that's not really true. And I'm sure it's the case for everybody in this room. Even though we feel like we're maybe good at handling our priorities, there's always going to be stuff that's going to be a drain that you don't really need to do. So like you've both said, essentially you find out what the main issues are, and you can't rebuild while it's still on fire, right? You need to step back, fix everything, and allow yourself that time. So people often get stressed about, oh my God, my work, this is caused by work, but I have to work, and otherwise I can't pay the bills. And so then more stresses creep in when you're trying to fix things, because the things that you're trying to fix are the things that you need to do. So giving yourself permission and time to do some of that is super important.
I wrote an essay recently called Essential, Non-Essential, and Junk, and it started with like talking about the material things in our life. The average American household has 300,000 items in it. Wow. That's according to LA Times, and I think when we look at that stuff, we tend to think it's all essential. Or at least like it's going to add some value to my life. If not now, someday in some far off, non-existent hypothetical future, I'll somehow magically start getting value from that
just in
thing.
Case.
Yeah, that thing that's in my attic, it will all of a sudden like seep into my house and start adding value. But I think the truth is, there are some things that are truly essential, and most of us have the same baseline essentials. The specifics vary, but housing and clothing and food and hygiene products, like there are certain things that we can say, all right, these are what we perceive to be essentials, and they'll change from person to person somewhat, but there are true essential items. The Then there are these non-essentials, the things that truly add value to our lives. Like we have these microphones right now. I could live without these microphones, but it's going to be a lot harder for us to make a high-quality podcast without them, right? But they are non-essentials to me. And I have to recognize that, but they add value to my life. The third, and I think most of the things that we own should fit in that non-essential category. We bring them in deliberately because we know they're going to serve some sort of purpose, or they bring us joy in some way. And the third category is the junk. The things that we pretend add value, but they don't actually add value, or things we're holding on to just in case, or the things I might as well store because I don't want to deal with it right now, or whatever it might be. And I think the same as what you were just saying holds true for the stuff that we're dealing with, the stressors in our life, right? There are some essential stressors and that maybe we have to keep those around, but then what are the things that are non-essential that we can remove for a temporary period of time, and then once we're recovering, we can maybe bring them back in individually slowly? And then what's the junk that we never have to want to bring back into our lives ever again? Gossip is one I think about. That is there was an evolutionary imperative for gossip. It probably helped us evolve to where we are today, but it doesn't mean it's necessary in my life anymore. And so I've completely removed that from my life because I don't get any value from it whatsoever. That's a stressor that is no longer there anymore. Jealousy is something that, we probably evolved to need a jealousy over a period of time, but it's not something that I find to be a particularly useful emotion now. And so I've decided, why don't I just consider that junk and get rid of it? And I think that helps me deal with some of the burnout. But I think I'm going to go back and sort of reassess, like, what are the things that are stressing me out? And what are those stressors are junk? Mm-hmm. And how can I get rid of those? Jason asks, why do we seem to have more health problems than ever before? Is it pesticides, hormones, antibiotics, sugar, something else?
Yes. I was going to say, it's all of those and probably 100 more things that we've not
can't measure, or that we aren't measuring, or that we don't know about.
You mentioned inflammation earlier.
Yeah.
And I know that I had, in fact, I'm still doing the curcumin supplements. And I think we have a question here about supplements somewhere, and we'll deal with that. But inflammation is something that we hear about, but it's something that we haven't talked a whole lot about as a culture until recently. But now we're hearing more and more about it. So can we talk about what we mean when we hear this sort of catch-all term of inflammation?
So it's basically your body responding to something, and usually, traditionally, it's a good thing, right? So if you get a cut in your foot, that area becomes inflamed, mm-hmm. and that's your immune system responding, making sure it cleans out any junk that may have gotten in, and then starts to initiate the process of repair. Yeah. And a lot of there are some very smart people who say that we shouldn't be against inflammation. Everybody's like, talks about inflammation being a bad thing, and it's usually not. It's the process is beneficial. However, in the setting of a continuous stressor which produces continuous inflammation, then we know that that's when you start to see issues. And it can be pretty much anywhere. Like we talked about the fact that it can affect the brain, spots in the body where you have continuous inflammation, so might then cause a cancer, because there's like a continuous repair process, cells continuously being damaged and having to be repaired. That can be a trigger for something like a cancerous growth. So it's any response of the body to something which it perceives to be foreign, and it could be bacteria or something else, and it's usually a good thing. But when you don't remove what's causing it, then it can cause issues. And
it seems that we're highly inflamed these days. I know I was, and taking some of these supplements actually helped. Those are the first things that I had taken that and by the way, you all had me on a supplement regimen that was terrifying. There was a sorry. But it was extremely helpful. In fact, things got worse before they got better at some points, especially once we fixed the gut thing, and then we went to the mercury stuff. So when we did the heavy metals test, I had really high levels of mercury, mm-hmm. really high levels of strontium, because it was in a damn supplement that I was taking, and I had decently high levels of arsenic, and I think cadmium, and so in dealing with that, we did this whole chelation therapy, and it was a bunch of supplements. There was one point I was taking 112 pills a day, and which was a lot of fun, like just
That's
carrying
intense.
these.
Yeah.
But I mean, like I said, I was laser focused, and I think there was maybe one day where I missed one of my 3 rounds.
See, this is why we recommended the full bore protocol. That we would not suggest this to somebody.
Yeah. Most people, and so most of this is with the intention of you get to the point where you don't need any supplements, right? That's
part of the goal.
Yeah.
And so right now I'm taking fewer supplements than I had in the last 2 years, but there's still there's a multivitamin and the curcumin stuff that I take. But for the most part, I'm not taking the whole litany of. I used to have pockets full of pills, but there was a period where I was getting worse because that chelation therapy. I mean, and you can talk about the science behind it, but you can't just go in your body and say, okay, body, please remove the mercury, but I'd like to keep the zinc and the selenium and all the good stuff. If you could just leave that in there, that'd be great. And so I think my immune system was pretty radically compromised last winter. I had a tour stop in Washington, D.C., and I couldn't leave my hotel room. In fact, I was going to go to the hospital. I felt too ill to leave my hotel room. Well, I ended up having hand, foot, and mouth disease, which is what usually 4-year-olds have, and my 4-year-old had it, and I caught it because I think my immune system was relatively compromised at the time. And I basically spent all last winter relatively sick, and I think a lot of it had to do with my immune system was pretty affected by this chelation therapy, and we did the 10-day fast that I only lasted 6 days and 1 hour on, but there were a lot of things that I did that actually it was getting worse, expelling the toxins and I know that has become a woo-woo word, and we don't mean it in any sort of woo-woo way, but there was a lot of getting worse before getting better, and I think inflammation was a big part of that, but then it was also these toxins that were in my body. Can we talk a little bit about toxins?
So the analogy that I like to use for that kind of process is if you looked at heart surgery right in the middle, it would look like murder. Right? Then towards the end, it looks a lot better, right? Once you've been sewn back up. So that does tend to happen sometimes. And you're right. So detoxing and toxins are the super non-specific thing that it's kind of like, oh, I'm going to do a detox, which doesn't really mean anything. However,
you have people drinking like juices with 50 grams of sugar and say I'm detoxing.
Yeah, I'm detoxing, which it doesn't make any sense. But there are, if you find something specific, and you can test for many of them, and we have various ways to do that, and you have some good data on how you might be able to reduce the body's burden of that, which we also have good data on, then in a very targeted specific way you can do that. And mercury is one of the things. So the strontium, unfortunately, we don't know how to get that out, and that's in your bones until they turn over in about 7 years time. I think Chris was saying we were talking about this the other day. So
please don't take this is important, right? So you should talk about how the strontium ended up in the supplement in the first place and why it shouldn't be there anymore.
This is a supplement for bone strength. And so I remember I when I was working in a hospital in London for elderly patients with osteoporosis, some of them would get I would prescribe strontium, and strontium basically goes into the bones, where you'd have calcium, and what it does is it makes the bones look really good on a bone scan, but absolutely does nothing for their strength. So we kind of feel better because they look better, but actually it doesn't really help you at all in terms of the strength of the bones.
It's the ultimate placebo, where you get the ostensible result that's measurable, but it's not actually doing something.
Yeah, so this is actually, it goes back to what you were talking about right at the beginning, which is the importance of the subjective experience. So we can talk all day about test results, but what you really want is to wake up with a boner, right? That's like, that's the holy grail. And like, no matter what the test results say, if that's happened, then, there's a big win there. So, right. So that's the strontium. But with the mercury, we know that basically there's no amount of mercury that's okay. Basically, you can get effects at any level, and the amount that it affects a given person, depends on a whole number of things. But we also know that there's where the exposures are. It can be exposures from fish is a big one. Although some of the benefits of fish seem to negate some of the negative side effects of the mercury. So that's kind of like a 50-50.
And that's through the selenium content of the fish.
Yeah, selenium content of the fish. It helps produce glutathione, which is one of the main antioxidants that we use to buffer various toxins, and so that, overall there's definitely a net benefit of seafood, even if it does have some mercury in it. But
and
then
it matters the type of fish as well. So Joshua was eating some big fish, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think the quantity as well. I mean, once or twice a day, every single day, it was tuna or mahi.
Tuna, sashimi, twice a day. That's going to be bad pretty quickly.
Yeah. I mean, or even canned tuna. Like it was all. I mean, and so I had to do with the quantity, but also that I had these metal amalgams in my mouth, which I had taken out. I sent you my dentist information because. I know that like that's one thing that I wanted to be really careful because, and we did 3 different mercury tests because I did it after we did the whole sort of cleanse, the chelation therapy and all the supplements, and my mercury was an acceptable level.
Really well, didn't it? We were amazed at how well that worked.
And yeah, it absolutely worked. And he had all these powders and all this crazy stuff, but it all worked. This magic potion, I think it was six times a day.
I promise it was very highly scientific with at least one reference for each thing. At least one study for each.
No, you sent me all the studies. I'm just messing around. There was nothing magic about it. And then I knew I wanted to get the metals out. I mean, they're ugly, but I didn't care as much about that. But I wanted to make sure there's someone who was going to do it where it didn't leach back into my body. That was the primary concern. And so we did a 3rd test, and then the mercury was even lower after that. And I've even reintroduced some fish back into my diet, not twice a day, but maybe twice a month. Where I felt good enough that I felt like I could bring that back in now. And so having those removed and then having removed it from my body and now just consuming a responsible amount, an appropriate amount of fish is right. It seems to be what was. It was a long road to fix it, but I'm glad we did, and I'm going to take steps to not go back down that path.
Mm-hmm. You see how important it is to understand what's causing the problem. If you'd gone to the IV chelation therapist, they said, "Oh yeah, no problem, I can get that mercury out, no problem at all." But if you haven't stopped eating pilot whale and you've still got a mouthful of mercury amalgams, then what's going to stop that problem from coming right back 6 weeks later?
Yeah, and so I immediately had those taken out right after we did the 2nd test, and then we did the follow-up test a few months later to make sure everything was gone, and the levels are great. Yeah, so thank you all for that.
See how much willpower he's got, by the way. I still have a mouthful of metal amalgams because I find the idea of paying. I mean, how much did you pay to have your mercury amalgams removed?
I mean, it was hundreds of dollars, but
hundreds.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to tell me 10,000.
No, it was not even $1,000.
Oh, really? Okay, so I'm a little bit less frightened now. But I mean, so I've still got a mouthful of mercury, and you've got one.
I got one, that I got when I was a med student because I couldn't afford the fancy filling.
That's really sad.
Well, that's a perfect metaphor. Is like if we don't pay for something now, we end up paying for it tenfold in the future, and not just monetarily, but worrying about it and like neurosing over the thing. And so it's best to take care of it now. Let's see, we got some more questions here. Shane asks, I'm trying to figure out how to deal with chronic fatigue syndrome. Okay, well, we just talked about fatigue. And maybe I could even ask this question about myself too. So he said, I've read it involves gut health, but a discussion would be great. So chronic fatigue syndrome, we were kind of talking about that with adrenal fatigue here. And it seems to be the same thing, but via a different name. I mean, we have these names. In fact, I think when he actually submitted this question, he used several other acronyms that I just edited out. But
so you might call it myalgic encephalomyelitis, which is ME. It's also the same thing for chronic fatigue.
Yeah. So with me, the one thing I do notice now is that I tend to sleep. I sleep about 8, sometimes 9 hours a night now, which is the first time in my life I've ever done that. I go to bed really early. Like Ella will be in bed by 8, and I like to go to bed around 8 if possible.
Same thing.
I still like to get up early, right? And so it doesn't always work out that way, but I do get minimum 7 hours a night unless I can't help it. Like this morning is a good example. So the last 4 nights in a row, I've got this tracker ring, so it tells me how shitty my sleep is on nights like last night. But the last 4 nights, I had 9 hours every single night. Which is great. I would wake up really refreshed. And this morning I woke up at 4, and I just knew that this is it. Like I am wide awake. I can lay in bed for the next 3 hours, but it's not going to get up. I'm not going to magically go back to sleep. So I might as well get up and get some writing done. And so there are times where I can fall asleep like that. I don't have a problem with insomnia necessarily, but the days like today, I know I will be really tired midday and I'll end up taking a nap. But there are some days, even when I get 9 hours of sleep, where I'm like, I'm still tired. So where do I go from here? Like if I'm tired midday, I mean, yeah, maybe a nap is the answer.
Yeah, so I mean, naps can be fabulous things, and definitely take advantage of them if you can. But so going back to the chronic fatigue piece, it used to be this thing where you'd be tested for all this stuff and then be like, well, we don't know what it is, but you're tired, so we'll call it chronic fatigue. And now there's been some fairly interesting research, at least, that basically brings it all back to the function of the mitochondria. So the mitochondria are these organelles inside your cells that basically, in their simplest form, they make all of your energy, right? And if the thing that makes your energy doesn't make energy very well, then you don't have very much energy. That's kind of makes sense.
But it's important to mention that a lot of other really interesting things start in the mitochondria, like hormone production and heme production, right, for hemoglobin to transport oxygen. So no mitochondria and you're proper fucked.
Yeah. So if you want to make cortisol or any of your hormones, the first step happens in the mitochondria. So basically, so much stuff happens there. And then, well, what is it that makes your mitochondria function less well? And it could be any kind of so it could be in the gut, because then, like we talked about, whether things are coming across that you don't want to come across, or there's some infection in there that's causing issues, some kind of systemic infection, or again chronic inflammation, so some response to something where you're not getting rid of the source, that can affect mitochondrial function. Certain toxins can affect mitochondrial function.
A simple nutrient deficiency.
Nutrient deficiencies can affect mitochondrial dysfunction. So
statins.
Oh yes, statins.
There's a drug that
statins are a mitochondrial toxin. So I guess there's two parts to this. So the first part is, if you're trying to deal with chronic fatigue syndrome, try as best as you can to figure out what it is that caused it. And it could be dietary, environmental, pharmaceutical. And then the next step is, when you're starting to recover, it's always important to balance your efforts. So what's very common in patients with chronic fatigue is they feel great on one day. They're like, I feel great today, I'm going to go for a run, and then they overdo it, and then they crash, and then they're fatigued for days on end until they start to feel better again, and then when they feel better, then they do loads. So the important thing is to do pretty much, if you can make yourself do the same amount every day, regardless of what it is, be that exercise or activities of daily living or work, so that on the days where things feel a bit harder, you make sure you're still doing the same amount. On the days when you feel really great, just enjoy the fact that you feel great, but don't overdo it, because then you cause those cycles.
In fact, Chris, early on, you told me, like, because I'm not especially active, I'm certainly not an athlete, but during these times of trying to get better, you were like, I think you need to exercise a little bit less. Yeah. Which was a weird thing to hear, right? Because it's sleep, it's diet, and it's exercise. And you're like, I think maybe you need to eat a little bit more. I'm like, wait a minute, like what's going on? So I started tracking my calories and realized I didn't have to eat anymore, because I was getting a substantial enough amount of calories and a really healthy, fat, a lot of fats in my diet, so I had a decent number of calories. But the exercise, I didn't feel like I wasn't out running marathons. I don't run at all, but just simple stuff, especially while I was recovering. You're like, it's too many pull-ups you're doing every day, or you're doing way too many push-ups every day, and let's scale that back a little bit. But the consistency is also the key, where it's like, there will be days like today where I'm like, I'm tired, screw it, I won't do the I'll wait till the day where I'm feeling better, and then I'll just double up on everything, right? So that is key. I'll have to make sure that I'm still relatively consistent, but more consistent, and also dialing back on days where I don't have to go balls to the wall every
enjoy that you have more in the tank. Like, I did what I normally do, and I could have done so much more, but I didn't need to, because I'm going to do some tomorrow. That's important.
That's great. All right. Let's see what else we got here. Shane, that's your question. Dina says, what's the safest way to detox from heavy metals on your own? My response to my pithy answer was, even LeBron James can't win alone. This was proven recently, and as he was swept in the finals.
Well, he couldn't win even with teammates. So.
Well, he was pretty much alone. He dragged 4 crackheads to the finals. But I think you need, you can reach out to the Nourish, Balance, Thrive guys, and they can help point you in the right direction, or find someone locally who's going to help you through this. But I think doing it alone is probably... Man, that's
Yeah, it's tough. You don't have to work with us, but I would recommend finding a coach or a clinician to help you. I mean, there's so many things that I don't know anything like. I mean, you just said a bunch of words I don't understand. If I was like had to understand that tomorrow, then I'd probably go and find someone that understood it and have them help me rather than trying to figure it out the hard way by myself. And
is that basketball?
Was it? Is that sport?
Yeah. Oh, LeBron James.
I'm so bad with American sports. I don't even know which sport is which. But yeah, so I would find someone to help you. You're right. But having said that, the closest we've got is Brian Walsh, is a naturopathic doctor from Maryland that we've worked with quite closely. He's another one of the shoulders that we've been standing on over the past few years, and he does a fantastic job of teaching both biochemistry and physiology, and he has a detox course that's incredibly evidence-based.
Yeah.
He has references
that's
for
what I did. That's part of my Mercury detox.
Yeah, so that's available as a training course. If you just Google his don't go to metabolicfitnesspro.com.
We'll put a link to that in the show notes too, Sean.
Yeah, /detox I think it is, and then he has 2 courses, one for clinicians and one for patients, and it's not easy to do without a coach, because it's just, I mean, as you know, it's incredibly involved. It involves sauna, time restricted feeding.
So let's talk about both of those real quick.
Okay, all right, yeah, sorry.
So sauna it's something I do pretty regularly, unless I have some sort of cold. I'm just getting over a cold from this past weekend, but I'm all fine today, so don't worry. But the sauna was one thing that you recommended early on, and I really started. That was one thing. What are the benefits? And also, I've been doing cold plunge or cold shower, but there's a nice place here that does a cold plunge, so
cool.
I do that. So, I can talk a little bit about heat shock proteins and cold shock proteins, but beyond that, I start to get lost really quickly. So, what are the benefits for in terms of detox, and I also think it's one of the things that really helps with my back considerably.
Yeah, so Stefan Genus, not Genius.
Genius.
Dr. Genius has some really useful resources online. Where's he from? He's from Canada, isn't he?
Yeah.
And he's published a number of studies that show that metals are preferentially excreted in sweat.
Some metals are preferentially excreted in sweat. Cadmium is the main one. Mercury, some too. But so there's 2 parts. There's some things that you excrete mainly through sweat, and it's very rare that people who aren't exercising heavily nowadays sweat a lot, because you're inside, air conditioning, all that kind of stuff. People don't like to sweat, so that's definitely one benefit. There's some things that you're going to get out. There's some sort of what we call them persistent organic pollutants. They're basically some synthetic compounds that only come out through sweat. So that's one benefit, particularly in a hot. So there are 2 types of sauna. There's the infrared sauna, which is basically red light. They're less hot, but they make you sweat a lot. But they don't sort of cause this heat stress. Whereas if you look at the sort of the hot sauna, it's like a Scandinavian dry sauna, where it's really hot. That also has a number of cardiovascular benefits. So a lot of studies done in Finland basically show that the more often you sauna, like a dose response, the lower risk your risk of heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes. There's even been studies done on heating people up, actually in a hot bath rather than a sauna, but in people with type 2 diabetes, and their blood sugar regulation improves. So there's kind of both the detox benefits, which you could get from either type of sauna, and then there's the sort of the metabolic health benefits, which we think are probably going to come more from that kind of heat stress.
So at least 2 times a week, usually 3 or 4 times a week, I try to do 25 minutes in a 200-degree sauna, and then do a cold plunge or a cold shower afterward. And I can tell you that the first time I went, like, you're right, I wasn't used to sweating, and I didn't like just sweat normally. Like I don't have overly active sweat glands. I took Ryan to cryotherapy a few weeks ago. He was sweating in the cryo chamber.
He's like that as well.
I mean, just sweating, and like I don't get that way, right? When the first time I went, I was in the sauna. It's 200 degrees. I'm in there for 5 minutes, nothing. 10 minutes, nothing. 12 minutes, I get this one little runnel of sweat on my forehead, and then all of a sudden it starts coming, and I realize, like, oh shit, I haven't actually sweated in the last decade. It's been a decade since I've had because I used to play basketball in high school and stuff, and I sweat all the time then, but I had the corporate life, and then I would sweat occasionally, but not a real like heavy sweat. And I swear to you, it was like I was sweating chalk dust or something weird. Like, and the stuff that was coming out of my pores. And now I do it every day, not every day, but every week. And it's just become a regular routine. It's habitual now. And the benefits from that are that, I feel that my back and my muscles are a lot better. But I'm certain that one of the biggest things for the whole detox that I did had to do with the sauna, heavy sauna protocol. Yeah. So, I would say don't go at it alone, Dina.
Can I just add that the best sauna is the one that you've got access to?
Yes.
You get this question a lot, like, is infrared better than dry heat? We don't care.
Any sauna is better than
you've kind of, and so this is a very Brian thing as well. Like, I'm not going to even answer that question. You've missed the point. Like, the point is to sweat. I don't really care how you do it.
Right. And then if you have access to both, then congratulations. Pick one that you'll do the most often.
Yeah.
And go with that. All right, Joanne says, what are your thoughts on the low-carb and ketogenic and Whole30 diets?
My wife's in the middle of a Whole30 right now. She's on Facebook in a support group.
So what is the Whole30 diet? I don't know anything about. It's our
default approach. That was the first thing that I did. So Whole30 is a version of what we might call a paleo template. So it's this idea of trying to recreate a diet that was eaten 10,000 years ago when we were hunter-gatherers and before farming and grains and all of that.
Right.
And it focuses on micronutrients. So every time you put something into your mouth, like I was with a friend the other day and they were spoon feeding a baby just boiled pasta. And the thing that made me cringe the most was not the gluten. It was just a missed opportunity for micronutrition.
Right.
We talked about how a simple nutrient deficiency can cause mitochondrial dysfunction. Well, you're just putting empty carbs into your mouth with literally zero micronutrients, unless the flour was fortified, which I guess they're obliged to do by law, right?
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, so that's interesting, the gluten thing. Like, we've demonized gluten, and I think it's probably good, but not for the right. We're not demonizing it for the right reasons. The real reason to demonize is like we're missing out on all these nutrients because we're just stuffing our face with these sort of empty calories and empty carbs, right?
Right. Yeah. So Whole30 is focus on minimally processed, micronutrient dense foods. You remove sugar. So for many people, myself included, when I first came to this, I was utterly hooked on sugar.
Yeah.
And couldn't really go more than about an hour without eating. And so ripping that Band-Aid off quickly and removing all the sugar can be really helpful for people. And
did you get headaches and stuff at first?
I was just really hungry was like the main thing for me. I was just and then it completely preoccupies you. You can't think about anything but eating.
You moved over. I mean, I don't think you're on a ketogenic diet now, but
so I've gone.
You've explored. So ketogenic diet is a high fat, really low carb, and moderate protein.
That's right. Yeah. So Whole30 was where I started, and I found that tremendously helpful. And like I said, my wife, who coaches the athletes that we work with, she's doing one at the moment, just sort of mostly in support of her friends, I think, in Santa Cruz. But it's very sustainable. You can go back and do it again and again. And in fact, my diet now would be completely Whole30 compliant. And we really like the book. It Starts with Food. It's very, very accessible if you're completely brand new, or you want to try and encourage somebody to get involved and they're totally brand new. It Starts with Food by Melissa Hartwig is very, very good. And they have some fantastic resources on their website, whole30.com, things like shopping lists and meal plans and eat this, don't eat that type resources that you need in the beginning. So I find it very sustainable. One of the things they sell the program on is it's only 30 days, right? It's like the greasy used car salesman pitch. Well, can you do it for 30 days? A bit like you did with Ryan, right? Yeah. Like, I bet you, how long can you do this for? Well, I guess it's a bit different, isn't it? There's a definite end to the program.
And you realize, like, you can do anything for a month. I mean, this isn't it feels like a sacrifice in the moment, but it's not a true sacrifice. It's actually the opposite of that. It's fueling your body. I
get to spend a month eating steak and eggs and vegetables. Oh, it sounds terrible.
Yeah, so that's the other thing that's great about it. Is sometimes people are like, oh, Jesus Christ, I never really liked eating cereal in the first place. You mean I can eat bacon and eggs for breakfast again? This is fantastic.
Right, because we've also been sold this bill of goods that salt is bad, and you eat the egg whites and not the yolks and all this nonsense.
This morning I was just across the road getting some breakfast when we turned up before the podcast, and the breakfast that I wanted had egg whites, and when I ordered I was like, can I have whole eggs? I want the yolk. That's the best bit. You're not going to throw that away from me.
All the micronutrients are in the yolk. Eat the butter, eat the yolks. Yeah.
Yeah, well, what we've been told, over many years. In fact, I was at the doctor's office the other day, and they had the screen on the wall, and I won't go back to this doctor's office because of it. And it was talking about eating a diet that's low in fat, and like, I mean, and like, you could tell they just had this out of date sort of nutritional information, and they were talking about the food group still, and it had a little thing with the food.
My Plate it is now. It's still wrong, but it's called My Plate. It used to be called the Food Pyramid.
No, they still had the food pyramid.
Oh, did they?
On
my
this
goodness.
electronic
That is
board.
old.
So it looked new because it wasn't a poster. It was an actual like electronic board that had the food pyramid. I'm like, really? You're still talking about eating bread with and so. Although, I mean, it goes back to a previous question. We talk about being obsessive. I think being obsessive about this stuff to a certain extent is important. But, Tommy, what you were saying earlier is like you want to control what you can control, but you don't want to kill yourself because of it. And it reminded me of this question. I printed out this article. I saw this. It's from McSweeney's. I'm sure y'all are familiar with McSweeney's. But it's called The Whole30 Challenge Changed My Entire Relationship with Food Because I'm Dead Now. I used to be just like you, overweight, lethargic, a carb and sugar junkie looking for my next fix, until I tried Whole30, the incredible nutritional reset program, and experienced a profound transformation of my body, mind, and spirit. I cut sugar, grains, alcohol, dairy, legumes, and literally every other source of nutrition out of my diet for 30 days. And I can honestly say that it has completely changed my relationship with food because I died on day 27 and no longer require sustenance. We'll put a link to the whole article in there. I think maybe the important thing that I want to illustrate here is take it seriously, but don't take it too seriously. Sometimes these things become religions, and you've got Team Paleo and and then now the carnivore diet is big thing. Yeah. And I've seen people who go on and they solve these sort of autoimmune problems. And it's not the carnivore diet that's necessarily changing or fixing the eczema or whatever they have. It is the fact they're removing the other things that were causing the eczema in the first place.
It's almost what you're not eating, or what you end up not eating. So, I mean, we mentioned Whole30, low carb, keto. All of those diets are great. Carnivore diet can be great. We have some people who we put on what you would call a whole foods plant-based diet, so a real food, vegan, low-fat diet for a very specific reason, not long-term. So depending on who you are, a whole host of different diets may be the best diet at that moment in time. However, almost all of them, and there was a recent, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, they all the guys who they're experts in all these diets, so the vegans and the paleo guys and the low carb guys, it was a meeting, I think in New York. I think it was called the Old Ways Finding Common Ground or something. That's what they were trying to do. And what they figured out was that they agree on 80% of stuff, which is don't eat refined carbohydrates, refined fats and oils and all that kind of stuff.
Like canola oil.
Canola oil. So once you remove those things, actually what you're left with is usually some plants and some animal products, and they look like food. They look like what comes out of the ground or comes out of the animal as soon as you've, slaughtered it. So if you focus on those foods, then obviously you can get into the macronutrients and keto, low carb, low fat, but the most important thing is removing all that other stuff. So once you've taken out the cookies and the fast food and the pizza and all that stuff, that's the most important thing. And then, once you're left with real food, whatever it is, that's probably the point where most people can stop worrying about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And occasionally you will have something that won't be part of that, and it won't be the end of the world. I recognize these things sometimes as sometimes we have these really small wins, and it's important to recognize those small wins, but also recognize the small losses. If you screw something up, you don't say, well, I've ate half the cake, I might as well eat the other half now too.
Right. That's the what the heck thing. Yeah. People do that with dieting, that they set unreasonable goals, which of course they don't meet, and then they say what the heck, and then they stop even counting. Like that's been shown in the literature.
And if you have one bad meal, that doesn't mean that the whole day is out or the whole week is out. And equally, don't punish yourself. So I sometimes eat cake and ice cream, but I really enjoy it, and then I don't worry about it. It's some food I'm usually having it with friends. I'm enjoying it in the moment, and then don't think about it ever again. And that's the really important thing. Don't punish yourself if if that does happen. But equally, the overall habit is the important thing.
Yeah.
So you still have to form that habit
Yes.
to be able to do the other bit
and not deviate from the habit. I last weekend had a piece of bread for the first time, probably a decade, and that was just because I couldn't digest bread well. Like it would just be this nightmare in my stomach. And now that you all have helped me fix my gut, I had a piece of sourdough bread, and it wasn't like Wonder Bread or something. It was
if you're gonna have bread, have nice bread.
Yeah.
It's really enjoy it.
And I had a piece of bread, and it didn't mess with me, and I was so shocked. And I still have the habit of not eating any of that stuff usually, but having this one piece of bread, and it was like this experience, and I don't feel compelled to eat it every single day still. In fact, I feel compelled not to eat it every day, so that if I do decide once a month or something to have a piece of bread, I can truly enjoy it, and maybe even have something to look forward to. Let's see here. Past Life Experience asks, how necessary are most supplements?
Depends on the supplement, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, magnesium. What do we know about magnesium?
It's important for everything, and everybody's deficient in it.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah,
over
so
300 enzymes.
I take a magnesium supplement that you all prescribed to me. Subscribe to, I don't know, you recommended. Yeah, there you go. And I still take it at night, before going to bed, and I know that is part of just my regular supplementation. But I'm certainly not taking 112 pills a day now. But there was a time where that was important for what I was trying to accomplish.
And then glycine is another one. Like, how many people are getting enough glycine?
Yeah.
What is so let's talk about magnesium. Let's talk about glycine. What are those?
So, magnesium is it's a nutrient element. So, sodium, you probably heard from salt or calcium. It's
on the periodic
table.
table.
It's on the periodic table. It's technically a metal. It's important for a whole host of things, including how your nerves function, how you produce ATP in the mitochondria. It's important for some of the enzymes that do that, and it's very important for things like blood pressure, cardiovascular disease risk, and we know there's been a couple of review papers that came out recently, one by Stephen Genuis, who we mentioned earlier, the detox guy, and then another one by James Di Nicolantonio, who's been doing a lot of work showing us that restricting salt intake is probably, for most people, going to be harmful rather than beneficial. It's all the other stuff in your diet that's the issue. It's not the salt.
Right.
And actually, there's a whole host, even though it's actually very hard to measure magnesium and detect a true magnesium deficiency, but if you sort of really dig into it, you can safely make the assumption that most of us are deficient, and adding some back in, taking a supplement, is very low risk with high potential reward. So that kind of thing can be very beneficial. Glycine is another one. It's an amino acid, so one of the building blocks of proteins, but it doesn't tend to be in the protein sources that most of us eat nowadays. It's not in huge contents in plant proteins, though there is some, and it's not really in muscle meat. So if we're eating, say, steak, you don't really get much glycine, and there's some really important stuff about the balance of different amino acids in terms of how you then do all kinds of other metabolic reactions in the body. So particularly methylation reactions. People might have heard of methylation being an issue that some people have, and glycine is very important in that pathway, and others it's mainly important for making connective tissue in terms of the building blocks. But in order to get those building blocks, you need to eat connective tissue. And how often do we eat skin and bones and cartilage and stuff like that? We just don't. Traditionally, we may have done that, but we don't do that anymore. So
Is that why you have me doing collagen with
exactly.
So
powder?
collagen is 30% glycine.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm taking it without even knowing I'm taking it.
Yeah, that's the great thing, is
exactly.
you get kind of outsource that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But you can do, so if you're listening to this and you don't want to spend a lot of money on a glycine supplement, then you can just eat the whole animal, right?
Yeah.
Nose to tail, make bone broth.
Right.
A lot of butchers consider that stuff waste products, so you get it super cheap. The bones sometimes, although I've noticed some butchers are kind of cottoning on now that they realize they can sell the bones for money, whereas before they would give them away.
Yeah, the market works that way.
Yeah, so you roast the bones and then just drop them in some water. If you've got an Instapot, which is a pressure cooker you can get from Amazon, you can do bone broth in 90 minutes, and then it's this rich gelatinous soup, and it's rich in glycine. So if you don't want to take a supplement, you can certainly make it for yourself.
Yeah, so any meat that's cut, the tough membrane and the stuff in the joints, that's where you're going to get it. Skin, so skin on chicken or any other animal will have a good amount of glycine in it. So yeah, you don't have to buy the supplements, and I guess this goes to the main point, which is that if you manage to get, if you're in good health and you manage to get all your ducks in a row in terms of maybe giving your body the nutrients it's going to need from the diet, most supplements are absolutely not necessary at all.
And one thing that I still haven't been able to tolerate organ meat yet.
Really, it's kind of like if you had it as a kid. So my wife actually ate a lot of organ meat when she was pregnant, in the second half of her pregnancy, once she got over the morning sickness, and Ivy just came out loving organ meat, and she'll ask for the US wellness meats, liverwurst and Braunschweiger.
Have you tried that? The US wellness meats, they do awesome, like they're kind of fresh meat sausages, which have a lot of liver and some heart and stuff in them, and they're really good, and they don't taste like offal.
I'll give that, because right now I've just been doing I do like beef liver pills or whatever, whichever ones you recommended to me. I've been doing those.
That's another way you can do it, but I think the US wellness meats, the breakfast sausages are really good. They taste just like deli meat, really.
Oh, okay. I'll give it a shot for sure. I'm at a point now where meat isn't just repulsive to me.
Of course. I mean, I do get that. When I was the same, I was only eating fish, and like the idea, but that was kind of the deal I made with myself. Actually, was if I was going to eat meat, then I would eat the whole animal, rather than just. I mean, what we do is we take a cow and we just rip bits off of its legs and just eat that, right? And the rest of it goes in the trash. You can't even. There's a farm down the road from us in Bonnie Doon, and we asked them if we could have the organ meat, and they said no, we're not allowed to sell you that. It has to go to like some freaking disposal facility.
Incinerated.
It's absolutely bonkers. Like that's the best bit. That's the only bit I can't get.
And if you go to traditional cultures, where we kind of feel like we can be informed by some of those people who are still living off the land. How would they eat if they're having to either farm just their own animals, or then get plants out of the whatever wilderness is around them. And so cattle herders, particularly if you think about the Maasai tribe, they drink the blood and they eat the organs, and in those kinds of societies the dogs get the steak, right? That's not they eat the intestines, all those other bits that we just won't eat. That's what is prized in those cultures. And obviously and so you're eating the inside of the guts of this animal that was just killed, and it's going to be full of those bugs and probiotics and all that kind of stuff, and that's the stuff that we don't really eat anymore. So if you're not going to eat those things, and then maybe some supplements become important, but you certainly can do it.
I think that the key is making sure you're getting the nutrition you need, and then you can supplement.
Start with food. It's an appropriate name for the book,
yeah.
and an approach with supplementation.
We would always ideally get people to a point where they don't need supplements,
right.
But sometimes you just can't do it for whatever reason, and sometimes you're not absorbing things properly, and you've been in a bad enough place that you could never get back to 100%. So if that means you have to take a little bit of magnesium and a little bit of glycine, I think that's okay.
The other thing about supplements is the potential downsides are quite small, right? The main one being financial. There's very few supplements that you're going to cause a problem. I mean, I suppose if you were to supplement with a ton of zinc by itself, or iron when you didn't need it.
Some B vitamins or a load of vitamin D.
So B6 has toxicity, right? You can overdo it, but generally you just create expensive P, whereas the problems associated with the nutritional deficiency are devastating. So, I mean, personally, I'd rather go the first option.
Sure, and there are some supplement companies that are better than others. I mean, often we have Thorne supplements because they're the most similar to, they have the rigorous standards.
They've got really good scientists and doctors on their team who choose the most bioavailable forms of all of the micronutrients. And then another thing we love with them, especially working with athletes who get tested, is they use the similar technology that we use when we're testing you, the human. They use that same technology to test the supplements to make sure that it is what they think it is, right? So, maybe your pea protein has got cadmium in it, and it's definitely plausible, and I think it probably has been found. And so they're making sure that's not happening by testing the supplement. It goes into quarantine when it first arrives, and then they test it 2 more times as it's going through production. So the standard of care, the quality is very, very high.
Yeah, and you pay for it, but you also know what you're getting. You know what you're getting. Creatine's another one.
That's a creatine. I mean, especially if you're an athlete, like there's not really much of a reason not to take creatine now, is there?
What am I taking? I take 1 scoop. What is that? 5 milligrams?
5 grams.
5 grams.
Oh, 5 grams. Okay, yeah.
5 grams, 1 teaspoon. Or it's probably, if it's like a teaspoon or a 5 mil scoop, it's probably like 2 to 3 grams, which is plenty for the average person. I mean, most people could probably benefit from some creatine.
Why is that?
Again, so it goes back to it goes back largely to methylation. So producing creatine is one of the most methylation heavy processes in the body, and basically what creatine does is it's a buffer for very, very rapid energy usage, particularly in the muscles, but it's also important in the brain and other parts of the body. And so that's, when you do something very, very fast, the first offloading of energy comes from creatine, and so it's basically an energy buffer in the body. But it's very it's very methylation and metabolically intensive to produce it, and people who eat a lot of meat, if you eat a pound or two of beef a day, you probably get around 1 to 2 grams of creatine. That's probably enough. If people aren't eating that much red meat, then they could usually benefit from supplementation. It's the most heavily researched supplement in terms of sports performance, and particularly in weightlifting or sprinting activities.
But you don't want the big sugary creatine drink.
No, so
that's not the creatine we're talking about. The creatine I have is from Thorne that you all recommended to me.
Thorne. A lot of people, in fact, it's so cheap now. Nobody's making crap creatine because it's just so cheap.
Well, so actually,
you can still buy crap creatine. I mean, you walk past.
I think it's all made by. Is it Sigma Tau?
No, this is the one important thing about creatine. Sorry, I was going off on my tangent about creatine, but it's called CreaPure creatine monohydrate. It's made in Germany, and so basically all the creatine that you buy is usually just white labeled CreaPure. They buy it in bulk from Germany, and then they put their sticker on it. That is what you want. If it's not CreaPure, it's basically made in some industrial state in China, and Lord knows what's in there. So
so you can trust the Thorne one. There are other ones you can trust as well.
I thought it was the CreaPure was so cheap that it wasn't worth anyone's time.
No, you can still find ones that aren't. Well, CreaPure is so cheap, but you can still find ones that aren't CreaPure. So
examine.com is a great resource, actually, thinking about it. They've got if you want to see all the scientific references on creatine, then examine.com is a fantastic resource, or any supplement for that matter.
And I still take like a Thorne AM PM sort of multivitamin
too. My wife takes that.
Yeah, so that's just your general multivitamin, and then the BioGest.
That's digestive enzymes,
support, some digestive enzymes, and some. It basically, for people who have had chronic gut issues, breaking down and absorbing nutrients is often still an issue, because the body needs to produce those, and when all of your systems have been struggling, that's just one of the things that gets shut down is producing those enzymes. And it's one of those things where they haven't done hundreds of big studies on them, because nobody's going to make any money out of selling digestive enzymes. But a lot of people seem to benefit, particularly early on as they're supporting their gut, just by taking some digestive enzymes. And again, we work with a lot of athletes, and there are some good studies on supplementing various enzymes and seeing improvements in terms of recovery. So there's definitely enough to suggest that if you're really struggling with digestion, you get bloated after you eat, and obviously you might have some deeper issue that you need to treat.
Once you fix the food side of things.
Once you fix the food side of things, and if there's something in the gut that needs to be gotten rid of.
This doesn't mean take BioGest and then eat the pizza.
Yeah, that doesn't solve all the problems, sadly, but it can certainly help as you start to get that stuff back online.
Okay, gotcha. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I'm taking regularly, but that sounds right. I do occasionally some fish oil from Thorne if I'm not eating sardines at the time. So I'll try to get it through sardines first, but then if I don't, I can supplement with some fish oil. But that's just occasional. And the small
fish, sardine, I mean, that's literally what the word means, and the small fish, sardines, have less time to bioaccumulate mercury, and so that's probably why they're better than the huge fish. They've been around a lot longer.
Yeah, for sure. They don't taste as good, but it's
oh really?
It's food as medicine. Yes, indeed. All right, so
that's actually also a good source of collagen and glycine. If you get the sardines, they come in the can with skin and bones.
The Wild Planet.
Yeah, Wild Planet ones are great. All that stuff goes in. You're getting all that stuff without
you're eating the whole animal. You're eating the whole animal.
I buy them by the case on Amazon.
Yeah,
I legitimately, and they just.
I wish I got into that game. Like I should have bought shares in Wild Planet a long time ago.
I know, right? Yeah, but they do it right, and it's one one of those places that you can trust as opposed to just going to.
In some parts of the world, it's part of their
7-Eleven.
culture. I was in Portugal last summer, and I think it's quite a deep part of their culture. And they actually have shops on the high street that sell nothing but sardines. You go in there, and there's all these, and it's almost like art. You know, the cans are all so beautifully painted, and there's so much care and attention has gone into the shop. It's obviously a thing there, and somehow it's just not in our culture for some reason.
Yeah, and for anybody who gets weirded out by like, oh my god, skin and bones, but you don't notice it.
You don't taste it,
right?
at
You
all.
don't taste it.
Yeah.
It's no textural component. It just kind of like dissolves in the mouth. You don't even.
You don't taste it because the sardines kind of gross, and so everything else is already there.
But most of the time when we work with people and they say they don't like sardines, they've just not had good sardines.
Right, yeah,
right?
I totally agree with that. In the wild plant ones, I get the lemon ones with it's lemon olive oil, and so like it sort of masks the flavor. Plus, it's high in fat too, and so like it's better than just getting like sardines that are flopping around in water from like a Costco
kind
or
of
something.
dry.
Yeah, you don't want that.
I once wrote an article for a fitness website telling people not to eat protein bars and to just eat a tin of sardines instead. Because like if you're eating a low carb protein bar, like the nutrition that you get in terms of protein and fat and stuff is almost identical to a tin of sardines. But obviously there's all this other good stuff in there. And I got loads of like people like, you're asking people to eat sardines after the gym. It's super weird, but that's what I would do. I quite like it.
I agree with you. And by the way, I think that's just a good rule of thumb anyway. It's like if it comes in a package, it's probably not worth eating in the first place, right? And so I think this we can wrap up the supplement discussion with the best supplementation is food, and then if you can't get it from food, then all the stuff we talked about, you can actually supplement the food that you're eating.
There's one tricky one I've just thought of, which I think is important. That's vitamin K2. Like, how does someone that doesn't eat that weird Japanese natto stuff?
What is K2? Is that in the multivitamin? Or?
It is in the multivitamin.
Actually, yeah.
Okay.
It's one of the fat soluble vitamins that basically tells your body. It does a number of things, but it's mainly or largely important in terms of telling your body where calcium should go. So like vitamin D is very important for like strong bones and all that kind of, not putting calcium in your arteries, which can cause a heart attack, sort of. But it comes from liver and eggs, and then the most concentrated and some cheese, but the most concentrated source is Japanese fermented soybeans called natto, which is you talked about not liking sardines. Natto is not good. Like it's hard if it's not been part of your culture to eat it. It's hard to eat. So if you're eating 2 or 3 pastured eggs a day, you're probably getting enough K2. But if you're not,
so? Okay.
yeah. I mean, because there was a big study done in Holland, I think, which showed that you basically need like 15 to 30 micrograms a day. It's not very much.
Okay.
But most people, if you're just eating a highly refined standard American diet, you're not getting enough K2.
Gotcha. Well, I was going to also mention probiotics, but I think the next question here is from April is, what are the best things you can do on a daily basis to maintain good gut health? So this is almost like a buzzword, right? We hear gut health, and like I'm seeing on all the products, and I see it on Cheerios now. Good gut health. I mean, I don't know if it's actually there, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's what they. So I think we have to be a bit cautious too. And when we talk about good gut health, one of the things that I think most expensive thing, the supplement that I have, has to do with the probiotics, the refrigerated probiotics. Yeah. So. Can we talk a bit about probiotics and when they're necessary, when they aren't?
Yeah, sure. I mean, to answer the original question, I think the best thing you can do for your gut health on an ongoing basis without spending a fortune on probiotics is to eat a wide variety of vegetables. Mm-hmm. And
what about fermented foods?
Yeah, fermented foods. I mean, what do you think, Tommy?
Yeah, I mean, so
like kimchi or
I think
kombucha.
It's interesting again that like most cultures have had some kind of access to a fermented food. Like you need a food to last longer than you have it for, and then there's some kind of fermentation process. And when you put fermented food or a probiotic, so these are bacteria you're putting in your mouth, they don't really go into the gut and set up shop. They don't then become the bacteria in the gut, but they do seem to help some processes along. It's just we're used to being exposed to these things, and they can have some beneficial effects. But It certainly doesn't need to be, come in a supplemental form. So yes, some fermented foods are great. They're not essential. Eating a wide variety of foods, be they plants, be they, so actually you can get some of those prebiotics, which feeds the gut bacteria from like the collagen and all that, the bones and
animal
things.
fiber.
Animal fiber, you might call it. So basically anything like that which sort of can feed.
So you're not trying to put the bacteria in on the food. You're trying to give the bacteria what it needs in order to be able to grow and survive and thrive.
Okay.
And
the caveat with that is that if you're somebody who's had gut issues for a long period of time, or you have some kind of overgrowth, or you've taken antibiotics and you've fostered some kind of issue there, then those are the exact foods that are going to be trigger foods for you. Those wide variety of fibers, and then you might need to try something you might need to do some testing. You might need to try something called a low FODMAP diet, which basically removes those fibers. You may even need to go even further and do like an elemental diet, which basically takes out anything that the bacteria in the gut can ferment. And then you build back up, right? It's not a long-term thing. You do that to try and starve down a population of bacteria that's causing an issue, and then you add stuff back.
Sometimes that's why the carnivore diet helps people with their gut issues, because
absolutely.
you have to, in some extreme cases, like extreme IBS, I've seen people talking about where they've removed essentially all fiber in order to fix, which is counterintuitive at first. Like, you want fiber to clear you out, but the fiber is actually the thing that's giving you the problem, and it's interacting with the gut in a weird way. And by sort of depriving yourself, maybe at least temporarily, maybe it gives the gut time to sort of work it out.
Yeah, there's actually interestingly very little evidence that adding fiber to the diet causes any real benefit, which is again contrary to one of the things that we've often been told. And in one specific scenario, which is IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, and constipation, actually taking out fiber seems to be beneficial. And again, it doesn't need to be a long-term thing, but that's definitely where some people are seeing benefit on something like a carnivore type diet, where they're taking out all plants and all the fiber associated with them. And it kind of makes sense. So if you imagine a tube that's blocked up, the answer to that problem isn't stuffing more stuff into the tube, because that's just going to cause more of a blockage, right?
Man, this is I'm all these in my head. Like I'm so when I first came to you, I had all kinds of, there would be days I wouldn't go to the bathroom for like 3 or 4 days sometimes.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's not good for getting rid of. That's another way you get rid of toxins, right? It's
I would pee just fine, but like I was just not pooping. Just a regular basis was not happening. And then I changed a few things, and my diet, just by default, we were removing some fibers from my diet because I was eating more meat, and so my calories were coming from more protein and fat.
Right.
And things started moving, and now I go every single day and often twice a day, and that is one of the largest improvements. I don't have the terrible gut pain. When I came to you guys, like I just knew, like, regularly I'm just gonna, every time I eat, I'm just gonna be in pain for a few hours afterwards.
It sucks, isn't it? That's when people start under eating, actually, is when they feel like that.
Right. And I didn't know I didn't know what to do, and then when I came to you guys, we started working together. Sort of by default, we removed some of the excess fibers. Like, I didn't realize like how much an apple would just mess me up, which you wouldn't think of. People often, apple a day keeps the doctor. No, it just kept me from going to the bathroom. That was the problem, and that's what was appropriate for me. And eating more meat actually helped solve a lot of the gut problems I was having, mixed with the probiotics and all the other things that we did to help fix the gut. So now that I do have good gut health, what sounds like what I do now is wide variety of foods, vegetables and natural foods, real foods, I should say, and none of the processed stuff. And then if I want to supplement a bit with sauerkraut or kimchi or kombucha occasionally, then those things don't hurt at all.
Right.
And they may even help a little bit.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's confusing because the thing that's going to help you in the beginning is not necessarily the same thing that's going to help you in the long term.
And the thing that's going to help you in the long term may be detrimental right at the start. If you were going to try and eat like that immediately, back then you would have felt lots of kimchi and fermented stuff and loads of fiber. You would have felt terrible, but now it makes you feel good and it helps. So it's just the appropriate thing at the appropriate time is, so it's sadly not an easy answer.
What's the thing we were talking about earlier? Putting the fire out first before rebuilding the house. But now I don't want to go and like take a fire extinguisher to my walls, it wouldn't make any sense to do that now. And so, yeah, it's what's the appropriate time. And this is I don't know a whole lot about this, but I hear this also as a buzzword. So Don asks, can you talk about Candida overgrowth and its symptoms and the natural methods of eliminating it? So I assume this is often related to our extreme intake of sugar and I guess sugars, right? Can you talk about Candida and why it's become a pop culture phenomenon recently?
Yeah, it certainly can be, and the sugar aspect it may well be part of it. And we talk about so this is, you might call it,
what is Candida?
It's a yeast.
Okay.
So you might call it yeast overgrowth. That's another thing. And you might recognize Candida because it can cause thrush. So rashes in the genital area is often caused by the same yeast. And the symptoms are wide and varied, and it's we tend to see it quite frequently, and we pick it up as a metabolite of the yeast in the urine. That's how we pick it up. And so a while back, Chris actually built some machine learning algorithms to try and predict biochemical problems, so things we might see in the gut or in hormones or in the blood, based on just the responses to some question, like a standard question. People come in, they answer 50 questions, and they just say, how well do you sleep? Not very well, or very well, or how lonely do you feel, or do you feel like you're a part of a group of friends, and you say like not very much or very much. So it's basically like on a scale of 1 to 5. And one of the things that predicts a yeast overgrowth is sugar cravings, or feeling cravings for sugar. So where previously that was kind of like one of those things where we were like, we're not really sure if that's the case, at least from our data, from the people that we work with, that certainly seemed to be the case, that it was predictive of a yeast overgrowth. And it can be associated with all those other things. So we talked about brain fog or systemic inflammation. It can produce something called oxalate, which can then do funny things with the minerals in your body. May be associated with things like joint pain, and maybe with kidney stones. But sort of depending on who you are, the symptoms can be varied. If you do have a test, or you can see on a stool test too, if you have a load of yeast that just turns up in your poop, that's probably a bad sign. And again, just like the bacteria in the gut, you will have some yeast in your gut. That's very normal. It's just when they start to sort of take over or fill a niche that other bacteria have left because they've been killed with an antibiotic or something. And then and this is actually one of the cornerstones of the things that Chris started doing with his clients, so maybe you can talk about it, but some herbal protocols can usually be very effective.
I was going to say, you asked a question about probiotics earlier, then this might be, so that's when we use them, is with a specific application in mind. I don't take a probiotic for no reason, just as like I take the multivitamin, it's for a specific application. And so Saccharomyces boulardii, actually, I think there's some evidence for that,
which is another yeast,
ironic, and it's not coming along and setting up shop. It's just temporarily creating an environment that's not conducive towards Candida, and then it's gone. The whole lot of them are gone. And actually, there's some evidence to show that it's helpful with overgrowth of C. diff as well.
That's why I was taking it.
Yeah, exactly. In super high doses. Like sometimes people would say, "Oh yeah, I took 1 capsule of that, didn't do anything." You were taking like how many capsules a day at the beginning? It was
no, I was doing the powder stuff.
That's a different one. I'm pretty sure you did in the beginning. It was a long time ago. It was over a year ago.
Oh yeah. Okay.
It's like 16 capsules a day or something for a couple of weeks.
It was quite a bit. Yes. Yeah.
But then some so we often use some herbal protocols. So oregano or oregano.
Biocidin works great actually on Candida.
Biocidin, which is it's like a tincture of various different herbs. There's also something called undecylenic acid, or SF722, which also has some lauricidin, which is derived from coconut. So there's quite a few things that can work against the yeast overgrowth. But again, find the thing that caused that problem in the first place.
Right.
So yeast doesn't just show up, right? There's some kind of... So
are you immunocompromised?
Or have you done some kind of damage to your gut? So there was some really interesting work that basically shows that once you've set up an inflammatory process in the gut, you start to feed a whole different set of bacteria. There are some bacteria that work really well in that environment, and there are some that don't. So is there something else that's causing an issue in the gut, which then, or causing an issue with your immune system, which then allows the Candida to set up shop? There's always going to be a layer beneath it. So start by thinking back, and again, it comes back to diet and environment and stress and all those other things. Try and figure that out, and then usually eradicating the yeast itself in most people is fairly easy.
Okay, we do have a terrible time with it with the athletes, don't we? And we're wondering whether over-exercising
the exercise is a problem.
Is actually causing the inflammatory environment in the gut, and then the bifidobacteria goes away, and then Candida maybe overgrows. It's just kind of conjecture at the moment, but we do see it a lot in our athletes.
Okay, so in the case of an athlete, maybe reducing the amount of...
Yeah, but you're never going to get them to do that.
I know.
You just take them on a law
Right.
at that point, right? Like, okay, we did a reasonable investigation, and we got as far as we could, and now we just need to make a decision. And I don't.
So I mean, we have some guys who the sport pays the bills, right? If you're
I can't tell an Olympian to stop.
Yeah, exactly. If you're an Olympian or you're a professional athlete, and that's
or
what pays
Formula
the bills,
1 driver.
or a Formula 1 driver, you can't do that. You can't say, oh well, why don't you just stop training, right? Then it's like, well, why don't you stop paying your mortgage? It just doesn't make any sense. So
I already went to the doctor, and he already told me to stop exercising. That's why I'm here.
So then you get to a point where maybe you appreciate that during hard periods of training you're going to develop some kind of issues with the gut. So you just cycle through, you take some oregano or you take some lauricidin or something, and it just sort of keeps things under control. And then during the off season, your gut settles out, and it has to be part of your protocol as an athlete, just because that's the nature of the game.
Gotcha. All right. We got, let's see. We have 2 more questions. We're going to save them for the postscript episode. So these questions have to do with sadness, depression, overwhelm, despair, and other emotions, and also anxiety. So each week we record a postscript episode for our Patreon supporters. So if you all want to listen to that, you can go over to theminimalists.com/support. We'll do a quick postscript episode. But before we finish this up here, there are a few other words here that we probably didn't get to. We talked about toxins. We talked about immune system. We talked a little bit about hormones. Is there anything else that we should maybe talk about? I know one thing that you told me, Chris, was hey, we test for guys, like testosterone is always one thing. How can I increase my testosterone?
That's a really interesting story, isn't it?
And I had low testosterone when we first tested it, and now I have moderate, but it's on the low side of moderate, I think is the way you probably described it. It was 502 or something.
Yeah, so you're well within what we would call the normal range, but you're just outside what the ideal. But obviously enough of an increase to see the benefits.
Yeah, I don't remember where it was originally, but it was well below that. Yeah. And we've done several tests since then, and it's improved incrementally. But also improvement doesn't necessarily mean like, well, I need to get this to 800, right? I want to have there's a term, roid rage, where someone is just like totally, they're full of testosterone. And you all sent me some studies that were fascinating about the increase in crime for people with high testosterone.
Yeah, overcomes the prefrontal cortex. Yeah. I don't think it does it. I think so. Normal physiological levels of testosterone don't cause that type of behavior, right? When you're talking about roid rage, you're talking about exogenous testosterone, and it just modulates an existing behavior rather than causing it to begin with. Right. But there's some really interesting stuff around.
It increases the likelihood that a behavior that you might have a propensity to do anyway, it might increase the likelihood that will happen. And if anybody's interested in this stuff, you should read Behave by Robert Sapolsky. We haven't mentioned him yet. He's one of our he's
heroes. Yeah,
absolutely.
We'll put a link to all these books in the show notes. I know people can dive in deep.
But yeah, so I guess so. The main thing that testosterone can do is it switches off the prefrontal cortex, which is like where your deliberation and it's your filter, right? Yeah. So it switches off. It can switch off the filter, and it's not like if you take testosterone, all of a sudden you become an asshole. It's like it makes certain things more likely to happen. But the main summary is that more isn't necessarily better.
Right.
You need enough for all those processes to happen.
What a metaphor for life. Minimalism. Sometimes we call it enoughism.
Enoughism. You need enough testosterone. But we've had people who are like, I'm gonna be fixed and feel great when my testosterone reaches 1,000, and it's just not true. Like there's nothing that's going to change when your testosterone goes from 700 to 1,000, because you already have enough to do all the things that you need to do. So like, and again, it goes back to the test results. You can fetishize a number, and we do see quite a lot of that, but in reality the subjective experience is much more important. Do you have any symptoms of low testosterone? If you don't, then great, tick, job done. We don't need to worry about it.
But if you have low libido or sex drive, in fact, there were some questions that you asked me early on, and I had to like do some serious rumination about it. You were like, you talked about, well, are you attracted to your partner?
Right.
And I think that's one thing, because I was in a long marriage, and I know like eventually we totally grew apart, and there was a problem there, and it didn't have anything to do with hormones at the time. It was my mid-20s, and it just had to do that we grew apart. And like, no, I don't think we were attracted to each other anymore. Like, we were really good roommates. And in fact, we get along way better now than we ever did when we were married. She has a great family now, and we can talk, and like we have a good friendship, but we weren't. And so you asked me that question, and I had to like really step back and think like, and the answer was, yeah, I'm crazy attracted to Bex, and like it's proven out in the physiology now, but there was a period of time where, yeah, I mean, it was like, well, if I could just fix my testosterone, that's kind of like saying, well, if I bought the third BMW, then I'll be happy. If someone has 700 testosterone, they're trying to get to 1,000, and it's like, okay, but why? Well, why are you trying to do this? And I think it's the same thing when we look at our material possessions, or we look at our health. Like, what are the symptoms? What are you trying to fix here? And I think sometimes we don't know. Like we chase after a number or a thing or a status or a number of followers or whatever,
right?
Without thinking why we're doing that thing.
Right. And it's this trap of constant horizon seeking. I hear that a lot from clients. I'll be happy when I lose another 10 pounds. I'll be happy when my total testosterone is 700. I'll be happy when, and of course, as soon as you get to 700 or 10 pounds lighter or whatever it is, just the next horizon becomes, and then you're just chasing your tail forever, you know?
Yeah. And being happy with enough is like the that's what minimalism is for me. It's the art of having enough and figuring out what enough is for you. Because there was a point where I didn't have an appropriate amount. My hormones were out of whack, and it caused low libido. It caused all these problems. And now the other nice thing is my partner and I both have really similar libidos. And I think that's one thing. If you're dealing with someone else who your significant other, you're looking for a partner, like finding someone with a libido that matches yours is something that is like really gratifying, because I'm not trying to have sex 14 times a day. But I also have the desire to have sex with the person I'm with, and it makes for a really fulfilling relationship. So you asked me some really hard questions when we first talked, but
I have to reveal that most of those hard questions were Tommy's. This is generally the way that we operate at Nourish, Balance, Thrive, is that we have this team of people, and we get together, and it's a scrum is an appropriate word. It's the agile technology. We use a system of divide and conquer to get stuff done with our clients, and they have this part of it is the scrum, and it's a metaphor for when you throw the ball into the scrimmage underneath these. It's a bit like that. So we bat things around, and quite often one of us health coaches will then go on and have that hard conversation with the client, and it's really him that's asking all these hard questions.
So you get to ask all the hard questions.
Then he doesn't have to actually make eye contact and ask
a proxy.
So it's great because we can talk about, so if somebody has low libido or erectile dysfunction, I can say, Chris, well, ask him whether he finds his partner attractive. Ask him whether he's masturbating to pornography. Ask him all these other things, and I don't have to do it. Chris does it. But I mean, the answers are important.
That's another thing that's like important. Like if you're used to a level of weirdness that's only obtainable from pornography, then good luck trying to get turned on when you experience real life.
Thankfully, Bex gets really weird, so we're good in that department. We can replicate a lot of what's on the internet. Let's see what else we have here. Skin and acne. We kind of talked about. You mentioned it with thrush. That's one type of that's I don't know if you would categorize that as an autoimmune response, but there are a lot of other like eczema or acne or what are the other ones that the skin, largest organ in the body, and we tend to have a lot of problems with it. I know if I eat dairy, I break out. And figuring that out just allowed me to cut dairy out of my diet.
You know how few people figure that out, by the way? Like, I think a lot. Like, how many young women are eating dairy today and ending up with terrible acne and then they do exactly what you do. You go to the doctor and they prescribe antibiotics for the acne, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing, man. I don't know if there'll be long-term effects of this. We'll see. But Accutane was one thing that I took for several years. Yeah. Way longer than the normal rounds people usually take it. And same doctor that gave me the Bactrim, put me on a fairly benign dose of Accutane. My lips are bleeding, but didn't have any acne. And so, yeah, we want the magic pill as opposed. I didn't know, man. I mean, if you would have just said, hey, yeah, that's because you're eating dairy, and by the way, you have this weird soy allergy that most people don't have, but you do it, and it makes your head break out. If you stop eating that, or I can't tell you have that for sure, but why don't you try eliminating it for 30 days?
I mean, the problem is that most people have an emotional attachment to food that you obviously don't. And I'm the same as you. I don't have emotional attachments to food, but people definitely have an emotional attachment to cheese.
Right? My partner, she's from Minnesota and went to school in Wisconsin. And I don't think you could ever get her stuff, but she functions fine. She thrives on cheese, so everything's fine with her, right? But and our 5-year-old, I mean, you have to pull the cheese out of her dead hands. But thankfully they're fine on it, right? And but I think we have to realize that if we have skin problems, then it's quite often it's caused by what we're putting into our body. Not always, but quite often.
Yeah, so a lot of skin issues seem like, again, we go back to the gut. So rosacea, something that people often like reddening or changing of the skin on the face, like that's very, or seems to be well connected to small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So again, just a dysbiosis or an imbalance of the bacteria in the gut. Certain, again, autoimmune skin conditions, allergies. So eczema is part of that kind of with seasonal allergies, and asthma, sort of like atopy we call it, which is just sort of being allergic to a lot of different stuff, and that can also be associated with gut issues. Acne seems to be problems with so people who have very high levels of insulin have a lot of that can contribute to acne. So dairy, particularly milk, is great at increasing insulin. So milk is often a big issue, and then also refined carbohydrates. Large glucose spikes, large insulin spikes. That seems to be a causative problem for people with acne. So
again, about that. I was like covered in it when I was eating, and it just all went away when I took.
And we hear that all the time. So people don't come to us necessarily to fix skin issues, but like you fix their diet, they're like, oh my god, my skin is amazing, and they just didn't even realize that it was a problem until they started eating better.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, mine got so bad in my early 20s that I finally went to a dermatologist who provided all these solutions, right? And all I had to do was change a few things in my own life, in my diet, and I would have radically improved all these problems that I had. And I think the key is, like, be willing to experiment, be willing to eliminate some stuff, and see what happens. If you eliminate something for 30 days and all of a sudden your skin gets better, then great. Maybe don't bring it back in. Or if you do bring it back in a minuscule level, every once in a while, like you said, maybe you eat a piece of cake every once in a while, but it's no longer that glass of milk with next to the glass of orange juice for breakfast, right? Yeah. All right. What else do I have here? Oh, what are your thoughts on alcohol and coffee?
Both can be.
I drink a lot
fine.
of coffee, but I limit myself. I do 3 cups a day now. Now in the corporate world, full disclosure here, I worked 80 hours a week, and I probably had 20 cups of coffee a day.
Oh wow!
And I of course I was like the shit coffee too. So I'd put like dairy in it and Splenda. That was all. God. Yeah, and so like I'm just like take it. That's not just coffee either. But if I drink 2 or 3 cups of coffee a day, and I always get this conflict, and it's black coffee and it's really good coffee, but I get conflicting sort of advice and reports back on that.
Yeah. So if you're again, so it kind of depends, and there's multiple ways to look at it. So coffee has been shown to or be associated. So they haven't done like randomized controlled trials, but if you look epidemiologically, it's associated with a number of benefits in terms of reduced risk of strokes and diabetes and Alzheimer's disease and all that kind of stuff. And actually, some of those benefits even come if you're drinking decaf coffee, because it's some of the like phenolic compounds that are in the coffee rather than the caffeine itself. People who may or may not benefit from the caffeine itself, it's to do with how well you metabolize caffeine. You can actually measure that if you're worried about it. So some people just metabolize caffeine really slowly. It really affects them.
That's my partner. So we did the 23andMe thing. Yeah, and then who did we send that off to? I forget.
Ben Lynch Strategy maybe? Prometheus perhaps.
Prometheus, yeah. And I metabolize caffeine very quickly. She metabolizes it really slowly, so she can't have anything after like 7 a.m. or she's screwed later tonight.
So that's part of it. I used to drink. So I drink a lot of coffee. Probably 50 to 75% of what I drink is decaf, Swiss water processed decaf, because I like the coffee. My first cup in the morning has caffeine in it. Then after that, because I used to think caffeine doesn't affect me, and then I was like, well, do you know what? Maybe I'll see if I notice whether I sleep better, and I do. If most of my coffee is decaffeinated, then I definitely sleep better in the evening. So it's the same with loads of things that you expose to. You're like, oh yeah, that doesn't bother me. Until you remove it, you don't notice the effect that it actually has.
And the Swiss water process is the thing that you're talking about that is important here. Just knowing a little bit about coffee. Ryan and I own a coffee shop down in St. Pete and a roaster. And quite often the decaf beans that you'll buy, if you go buy Folgers decaf at your local Walmart, it's just the worst of the worst beans. And then the process of decaffeinating them basically is it's a chemical process. Yeah. So they throw a bunch of chemicals on there. And what you're talking about, the Swiss water process, is a natural way to remove the vast majority of it's decaffeinated. Doesn't mean no caffeine. It just means radically reduced. So your average cup goes from 100 milligrams to maybe 5 milligrams of caffeine.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of organic solvents. So if you imagine like dipping your beans in like paint stripper and then grinding them up, and so that's essentially. I mean, a lot of that stuff evaporates because it's very volatile, but still, not ideal. So
just add Splenda and you're good to go.
So I think, does that cover all your coffee questions?
Yeah, I think so. Now let's talk about alcohol. I don't drink personally. Yeah. But then you always hear this conflicting information. 1 glass of red wine, increases resveratrol or whatever that is. So the interesting thing about resveratrol. So again, resveratrol was going to be the anti-aging compound that was going to make everybody live forever. They recently did a study using high doses of resveratrol in people with type 2 diabetes, and actually in those in the high dose group actually got worse. So it's not the miracle drug that we once thought it was. But actually, to get that kind of resveratrol from wine, you need to drink like 20 gallons a day or something. So that's definitely I'll try it for 30 days.
That's not why alcohol can be beneficial. And so again, if you look at studies of people and you ask them how much they drink and then you follow them over time, those that drink a small amount, so on average 1 to 2 drinks a day, or on average around 1 drink a day, they do seem to have lower disease risk, live longer. There's multiple parts of that. If you're sick, you're less likely to drink, so you automatically stack the deck against those who aren't drinking. Mm-hmm. And then there's also obviously if you drink a lot, and most people who drink too much, and that's associated with a whole host of other issues. However, again, going back to the coffee, the same with the alcohol. If it's a small amount, and you're enjoying it with others, and it's a process of socialization, and that nice glass of red wine means that you're with friends and having good conversation and all that stuff, then that's great. Is that 1 glass of wine going to make you healthier? Who knows? Yeah. But it's certainly not going to be detrimental, at least for most people. And then the sort of the setting and all that can be beneficial. So again, a small amount is absolutely fine. We have no reason to think that it's going to be detrimental. But if it's you get home after work and you're by yourself in front of the TV drinking a beer, again, sort of like you can do it better, and I think that's how you should think about it.
So it can be fine. It's likely has few, if any, health benefits, and obviously drinking too much has a whole host of issues we all know about.
There may well be a small health benefit. The problem is that it's very difficult to find that signal because of, like I mentioned previously, those who don't drink, there are lots of other reasons why they don't drink. So then when you see like the curve of amount drunk versus health, it's very difficult to parse out what's a true benefit versus what's like just a statistical anomaly based on who you're sampling. So there may be a small benefit. There may not be a benefit. I would, if you're enjoying it and it's part of like a bigger thing. So I was talking to a client just yesterday, and that she mentioned that she hasn't been drinking, but the other day she was with her friends in Italy. They were by a lake and it was sunny, and she had half a glass of red wine. I was like, great. Like that's if you're gonna drink, like that's the perfect way to do it, right? You're with your friends, you're enjoying it, you're in the sunshine. That's fine, but don't like go home and like chug a glass of red wine because you think it's gonna make you live longer.
Ryan has talked. So we both have families who struggle a lot with alcohol and drug abuse. Both of my parents were like extreme alcoholics. The reason I've never touched a drink in my life because they drank enough for my entire life as well. But I know Ryan throughout his 20s, and he's talked about this before on the podcast and in writing. He would. And actually, in the next film we have coming out, he does a deep dive in this. But we talk about he would go home and have a case of beer.
Wow.
A case. There's 24 cans.
Oh wow, 24. I thought we talked about a 6-pack.
Nope, a case, and then to go out to the bar afterward.
Yeah.
And so like there's nothing healthful about that type of experience, but there are times. What sounds to me like what you're saying is there are times where maybe it's social lubrication. One drink is not a bad thing, but also don't think it has the magical benefits it's going to fix your life either.
No, exactly. But again, it's one of the when you sort of create a robust, healthy human, then you can tolerate more of these things. That doesn't mean you should force yourself to tolerate them. But
right.
In many of the people that we work with, cutting out alcohol altogether to begin with is very important. But then adding some of that back in can certainly have benefits for multiple reasons.
Can we talk about CBD and THC? We both live in states where that's legal now.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, I first started doing CBD oil last year, and just to help out with sleep. I've heard people talk about, it's good for back pain and all this other stuff, and I found the curcumin is actually way, way better for back pain than the CBD oil was for me. Although I haven't tried the lotions and stuff like that. But then also THC and edibles, especially like the little spray or like a vape pen, before going to bed. I've found that helps me out a little bit with sleep if I'm struggling with sleep. So I know there are obvious upsides and downsides. I'd like to get some opinions on this.
We actually have some data. We don't even need an opinion.
And we were actually talking about this over breakfast. That's the kind of guys that we are. So the interesting thing is that CBD on its own, based on the data that's available, should not help with sleep. So basically, when they've looked at it and they've given people CBD alone or CBD plus THC, the CBD alone can actually cause alertness, and it may be to do with how CBD and THC affect cortisol metabolism. There's some other stuff, the signal, the ways that they signal. So some people may sleep worse if they take CBD. But when you add THC, then people seem to sleep better. So there's a synergism there. However, I can say for personal experience that I've tried CBD alone before bed, and it certainly seems to help. It certainly does seem to help me sleep. And why that is, I actually don't know. I don't have a study to say this is why. I think there's going to be an interaction with all the other things that are going on in the gut. CBD has certainly been shown, to improve gut inflammation, gut health. I don't think that's an issue for me, but that's particularly in animal studies, and now it's being translated to, CBD is now being used for in cancer therapies and for epileptics, and they're starting to use it in people with inflammatory bowel disease. So can certainly have a number of benefits. I haven't tried the CBD plus THC. THC was more of a thing I did in my teenage years, but have both been shown potentially to help with sleep. The potential downsides are obviously then can interfere with cortisol metabolism and all this other stuff. So if it's not causing you benefit, then there's potential downsides for taking it.
Yeah, what are the downsides?
So we do think, particularly for people, heavy marijuana users, there is some risk of mental health issues. If that's coming from THC or other things, obviously the strength and the concentration of THC in marijuana has increased dramatically over the last few decades. So there's multiple factors at play there. If you're taking 10 milligrams of THC with 30 milligrams of CBD before bed, you're probably well under that risk threshold. But there are studies that show that it interferes with hormone metabolism, cortisol metabolism. So it's at the moment it's kind of a try it out and see if it benefits you. But equally, we roll back to our continuous message, which is, why aren't you sleeping in the first place?
Right.
You don't want to medicate yourself to sleep. You want to find out what it is that's causing your poor sleep in the first place.
Similar to the melatonin supplements, where that can help, but that is a band-aid on
it's a band-aid for you not
one.
having enough melatonin because you're exposing yourself to bright lights at night, or something like that.
Right. And so I tend to microdose with it. The few times where I've done edibles where I get a I can't do anything else besides eat potato chips today. I don't like the feeling, and so I tend to avoid that. But I also have found that the mental health thing. So I have mental health problems running my family. My dad was schizophrenic. My brother was schizophrenic, killed himself, and so I know that's the reason I won't do psilocybin and other things, because there's a potential for even though I think I'm well past the age at this point where those symptoms would present themselves. I do notice that the couple times where I've tried that an edible that is this is too much. The next day, it's like the roller coaster. There, you can't have the high without the low, sort of thing. And the entire next day, I'm just I should be happy right now, but I cannot be happy.
I think this is a story for anything that you take to try and change the way your brain functions. What we usually say is there's no biological free lunch, right? You can't ask your brain to do something which you wouldn't normally do and then expect it to be completely normal afterwards. So nootropics are a classic example. You take these compounds, are supposed to increase brain, cognitive function, various brain functions, but it might increase function in one area, but it makes you less good in another area, and then can we
expand on that? Because I'll take a nootropic usually, but the only time I do is before a podcast.
Yeah.
And I know in the afternoons I have this
crash.
Yeah. There is a nootropic crash for me. Yeah. And I thought maybe I was unique in that because I've never heard anyone else talk about it. But
no, I certainly have experienced the same. And there are some nootropics that are basically just like the kitchen sink, everything's in there, and it sort of switches everything on, and you definitely notice a difference, but then you get a come down later. So I often likened it to taking MDMA, where you switch everything on, you feel great, and then a few hours later you have this big come down. And it's not the same for everybody. Again, it's something that you have to experiment with yourself, but again, we go back to, why isn't your brain functioning as you would like it to? Why do you feel the need to take something to enhance your brain function? Are there other things you could be fixing, and therefore you don't need to take the nootropic in the first place?
Yeah.
That's always where we're going to go back to. And then if occasionally you need to try something like that, you just need to be aware that asking your body or brain to do something you wouldn't normally do, you're going to pay for it later.
Yeah. I found for me the THC thing is not to a point where it's or at least that I feel there's any sort of psychoactive effect. It's like microdosing. It's like 1 or 2 milligram sort of thing. And the thing that helps me with the sleep is it prolongs the period where I stay asleep. Another thing that has really helped me, and I've had to get really sort of diligent about it, and I screw up still all the time. Water. I drink a lot of water during the day, but I stop at 5 p.m. I stop drinking liquids at 5, and that way I don't feel compelled to get up at 3:30 a.m. to pee. Which sometimes when that happens, I get up at 3:30 a.m. and I'm like, well, I'm up. I can't get back to sleep now. And so I found those two things for me. And the water is probably way more helpful than the THC, to be honest with you. So just something to think about. Any other words about THC?
No, it's not something that really interests me, honestly. I'm far more excited about the stuff that's free, like sunshine. I'm very excited about, whereas pharmacological effects.
A sunshine deficiency can definitely cause insomnia. So you can fix that first before having to buy a supplement. The one reason why we talk about CBD is because, again, it might help with people with inflamed guts, and we see a lot of those. So we know a lot of people who feel that they've benefited from taking some CBD.
Yeah, and so that's an interesting thing that you brought up recently, is that maybe you have some problem that's stopping you from sleeping, and then you take another thing that makes that first problem worse, and maybe it introduces another problem, but the net effect is still positive, and so your sleep does get better.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. What did we talk about here? Meditation, we won't really deal with that. I mean, we all agree that it's a good thing, and we probably don't do it enough.
That's always
the people that need it the most do it the least.
We've had Sam Harris on, and Dan Harris especially. And in fact, I went to a Sam Harris and Dan Harris event recently, and I suspect that Sam believes that Dan isn't really meditating. That's what I end up getting from the event. And I sent Dan a text afterward, just kind of rib him. But I think it's just we need different words. Like what Sam thinks of as meditation is, after he spent 11 years in India in caves, basically he learned how to meditate, kind of thing. I'm exaggerating. I'm being a bit hyperbolic, but he's gone on 3-month silent meditation retreats, and which, by the way, and he's warned some people against that. Like, you could have a serious mental breakdown too, and he acknowledges that. And you want to dip your toe in the water before jumping all the way in, and realizing you can't swim. And Dan's prescription is, hey, 1 minute is meditating. Like, if you can, it's better than 0 minutes, right? And I think it's two different things. There's almost like deep meditation, and then there's like the beginner's meditation, and
Headspace. I'm still stuck on day 10 of take 10.
By the way, you do a great job narrating it.
He does sound a lot like you.
They do. They sound a lot alike.
No, I wouldn't like to say. Andy Puddicombe is quite fantastic on Headspace, isn't he? His voice is perfect for it.
It really is. It's very soothing. Although Sam Harris has his new app. It's in beta right now, and he's been spending years on it. So I'm interested to see what he does.
I was just listening to him interview Michael Pollan, and I enjoyed that more than the book itself, actually.
Really? So if you're talking, you mentioned psilocybin briefly. So Michael Pollan's new book, How to Change Your Mind, about the history. Great title, by the way. The history of psychedelics. It's actually really interesting, and the neuroscience behind how they affect the brain is really interesting, and it's got very little to do. So they used to be called psychotomimetics, which basically mimicking psychosis. That's what people thought originally, but it actually has very little to do with that. And what they seem to do is switch off something called the default mode network, which is basically your continuous thought processes, ego, all that kind of stuff. And when you put people in the MRI to look at this, those parts of the brain essentially just get turned off. So people are kind of shutting down the processes associated with so ego, self-comparison, anxiety, all that kind of stuff. And then when it comes back online, if there's been a therapist involved and they sort of like guided you through it, actually you can affect a lot of those sort of mental health issues by using this as part of like a therapeutic process. So it's really very interesting.
So for those of you who are ill-informed or uninformed, I should say, we're talking about magic mushrooms, basically.
Magic mushroom, or LSD has the same effect. DMT from ayahuasca has a similar effect. They all have that same effect on that part of the brain.
Right. And the Michael Pollan talks about the if you do have some sort of risk in your family of like schizophrenia or something, then just be careful with that.
If you're going to do it, if you're going to do it for a mental health reason, and there is for post-traumatic stress or some other, they've used it for alcoholism and all these other things, but it requires a therapeutic relationship with a therapist who's there at the time. It's a guided process. It's not just you at home on the couch dropping some acid tabs and hoping that things will get better.
So I didn't get that far through the book before I got bored of it. But so I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this information? Is it like I can go onto the internet right now and order this thing and do exactly what you just said?
Because you can't order it because it's illegal unless you're in that setting.
Right. So you have to develop a relationship with some kind of physician who can prescribe it.
I think yes, but it's mainly in a research setting,
right? Exactly.
But I think the idea is that the book is before that. This is LSD has this whole kind of torrid history, particularly in the US, and the book is trying to teach us that it's maybe not what we thought it was, and it has these effects on the brain that can be beneficial in the right setting, and it's trying to de-demonize the
Is
drug.
that just a baby boomer problem, though? Do you know any young people younger than 50 years old that have that demonization of the drug, or is it?
I mean, if it's been for the rest of us, it's been illegal for as long as we've been alive. So that's I think that's part of the problem. But you're right. I mean, it's the baby boomers who saw Timothy Leary and all that kind of stuff with LSD back in the 70s. That's a big part of the issue. But I think but then again, Michael Pollan is one of those guys. So he's potentially writing for
an instruction manual on how to change your mind.
Yeah.
but also it seems to be that these maybe one of the big concerns from the pharmaceutical perspective, and I'm not a conspiracy guy that thinks big pharma is trying to plot against us, but they do have a profit motive, and it would make sense to keep drugs that are not patentable illegal, so that my patent drugs can continue to serve people. If there are ways to treat depression, and the biggest thing that was, I don't know if the stat is exactly right, but it helped 85% of people quit smoking after one dose of psilocybin.
But so then they tried to. So this is an interesting part of the history. So that's in the hands of certain therapists and scientists,
right,
in the right setting. So then when they tried to repeat those with a more rigorous, controlled setting, and they basically gave people the drug and then locked them in a white room by themselves. And surprisingly, those guys didn't react very well to that. So it requires the right setting. It requires a therapist. So that's the thing, is in the right setting, apparently, and again, I don't want to sound like I'm some big poster child for this. I'm just reading the book and I'm enjoying the science. I'm enjoying the science and the history. But so if the setting is right and the therapy is right, then it does seem to have benefit, but you can do it very wrong and then it can have negative effects.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that's the big caveat, but there also seems to be a lot of promising research here. And the thing that Sam Harris talks about is there's sort of shortcut toward meditation, right? I mean, and understanding.
Right. Yeah, so you can get the same effect from holotropic breath work or meditation, or like all of those things can help you switch off those same parts of the brain, and so you don't have to be taking drugs to do it.
Right. It's just a much more rigorous process, right?
Yeah.
But it's totally possible. I think of sauna sometimes, like when I go back and forth between a hot sauna and a cold plunge, I feel totally euphoric in a way that, like, I suppose I could replicate with alcohol or marijuana, but this is a more natural way to do it, right? So just something to think about. What else do we have here? Introversion versus extroversion. I don't know why I wrote that down, but it's probably a good place to
actually, I have an interesting. I mean, so that's one thing that changed for me. Certainly, I was this back office programmer that used to get. I mean, success for me looked like not making eye contact with people. Locked away in the back office somewhere. And then I started a business, got married, had 2 kids now, started a podcast, all this stuff that seems quite extroverted, and it certainly wasn't part of my character before I went through this process. So I don't know, like, can all this stuff change that? Well, this seems to be my experience. Whether it would work for someone else, I'm not quite so sure. But yes, it's interesting to think about.
I have a bit of the opposite story, actually. So I worked in the corporate world. I was essentially, I managed hundreds of people. And so, like, I was around people all day, every day. From the time I woke up, I'd get my BlackBerry and I'd start responding to emails, and I'd hurry up and go into the office, and I'm around people all day, leading and coaching and meetings and blah, 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 and customers. And I'm just around all these people all day. And I didn't realize how burned out I was. That one of my favorite novels is a book called Freedom by Jonathan Franzen. And there's a line in there, and he talks about the unquenchable thirst of solitude. And that resonates so much with me now. Like, I've set up my life in a way that I do spend at least 80% of my time alone, and it really fuels me in a way that I didn't realize like I wasn't getting that fuel. And so I was a non-optimal version of myself 100% of the time, because I was always around people. And so those interactions at best were 30-40% of what they could have been. So I don't know if there's any data that y'all want to talk about with respect to introversion or extroversion, but
it's interesting to think of it from an ancestral health perspective. Like, how big would your tribe have been? How many people would you have seen on the average day? Would it been 150? I don't know. Yeah, like 40 seems like a more reasonable number.
More like 30 to 40, I think, on average. Something like that.
Yeah. So but I find that I'm a much better version of myself. I can be at the 70, 80, 90, 100% version of myself when I'm around fewer people. And Ryan and I did a recent episode talking about the different types of relationship in our lives, and he's the exact opposite, extreme extrovert. I've never seen him alone, he has a lot of sort of these secondary relationships that I don't have. So we look at these. I look at relationships as we have three different types of relationships. We have this sort of primary relationship that use your closest family and friends. You can usually count on one hand, two hands if you're Catholic. But the closest people in your life, it usually fits on one hand. And then the next layer of the concentric circles, you have the secondary layer of friends. And these are like people you consider close friends and family, extended family, people you work right next to. And I find that extroverts have a lot more people on that second ring. And then you have that third, the peripheral ring, or the tertiary relationships, the acquaintances, the coworkers, the friends that you see. Like some of my closest friends I talk to once or twice a year, but they're the most meaningful conversations I have in my entire life. Likely because we only talk once or twice a year. I go back to Dayton, Ohio 3 times a year usually, and when I do that, I find that though I sit down with the people that are closest to me, and I make time for them, and we have these great conversations, and it's like we never left. But if I had to see them every single day, I don't think our interactions would be as meaningful. I think with Ryan, they probably would be, though. Like every day, he would just find something meaningful out of it, but it would drain me. So
he's probably just found a better answer to the question. So what do you do? I could imagine being you. Yeah. Like people ask you, what do you do?
Well,
it grinds you down.
It does, man. I don't want to come off as pretentious. I've been trying to think of like just really weird things that I can say to people to like get them to go away. But I find when I really want to like rib someone, I'm like, what do you mean by that question? Like, do you mean like what's my job title? How much money do I earn? So you can compare you to me on the socioeconomic ladder,
which is quite confrontational.
Yeah. And so I think quite often we do mean like what's your job title, and I think that's just a dangerous question to ask each other, because then we get wrapped with this whole identity of like, this is who I am as a person. I'm the director of operations, and you can't pry that from my hands. And then when you do, when I get laid off, my life's over because you didn't lay me off. You removed my identity from me. And that happens with the third BMW. It happens with the veganism. It happens with the carnivore diet. What do? I'm paleo. What?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
I do CrossFit.
Yeah, right. What do you do? CrossFit. 8 days a week. And my back hurts. All right, well, let me see here. I usually do something called added value segment, where we talk about things that have added value to our lives recently. And since Ryan isn't here, I'm just going to talk about your podcast, because I think you guys do a great job of taking things that are outside of the world of just medical terms and jargon, and I'm terrified to even dip my toe in that water because it's going to be too hot or too cold for me. And you distill it down to a way where it's like explaining how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. and I feel like it's digestible for me. And that when I know like I can digest something, then it often raises more questions, and then I'll go in a different direction. So I'll encourage people who are listening or watching this to just check out the Nourish, Balance, Thrive podcast. And if you're interested in working with these guys at all, or just seeing more about them, just go to nourishbalancethrive.com. We'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. And just a quick follow-up on Right Here, Right Now. It's a segment we do where we talk about what's going on in the lives of the minimalists. My birthday is this week. I'm turning 37 years old, and I want you all to get me a birthday gift. I legitimately want a birthday gift from you. So I'm from Dayton.
You're gonna end up with like 2 million things turning up at your house.
Well, I'm gonna let me be specific about my gift then. Thank you. So I'm from Dayton, Ohio, and second hungriest city in the United States for families. And West Dayton, which I didn't grow up in West Dayton, but I grew up in Dayton, and it's the overdose capital of America. We have a lot of problems there. The opioid epidemic is serious, but there's also another crisis there. I think the second largest food desert in the entire country is West Dayton. and there is not a single grocery store. There's 1 million people in the greater Dayton area, a couple 100,000 in the city proper. In the west side, half the city, there is not a single grocery store since Kroger closed in 2009. And so there's access to food. If you go to the local liquor store, you can buy Cheetos, but you can't buy nutrients. You can't buy nutrition. There's not a single grocery store. And so Ryan and I have a really ambitious objective. We want to help build a grocery store, food co-op in Dayton, Ohio next year. And so we're trying to raise some money. And we've partnered up there is a place called the Gym City Market. And they don't exist yet, but we're trying to raise funds for them. So we're going to try and raise $100,000 over the next 2 months. And Ryan and I are going to donate a significant chunk of our own money to try to make this happen, but we need your help. So if you'd be willing to donate $37 for my 37th birthday, that would be the best gift you could give me, but it's also going to help provide not just food, because I think having access to food is really important. You all know this, but also the education. I didn't know that for me, like, there were certain foods that were really bad for me. I just thought, I thought potato, well, it's a vegetable. I might as well just eat all of them, right? Potatoes aren't inherently bad, but they're better than Cheetos. But how about kale and arugula? And so we're going to provide education with this place. And so providing the access to food, the education about food, so that people can make the right food choices and have food to feed their families is something that we want to do. So we'll put a link in the show notes, but you can go to, on my birthday, June 29th is my birthday, by the way. Just go to theminimalists.com/Dayton. In fact, you can do that today. It'll take you right to the page where you can donate. If you donate $37 for my birthday, you'll help us with this co-op that we're trying to build. If you donate $90, that will give one family a lifetime membership to the co-op. So that's another way to help. Or you can donate however much you want. I know we've done a few things in the past where people want to donate more than that. By all means, we welcome it. If you want to give some money, help us feed some people who, it's in our backyard. I spent the first 31 years of my life in Dayton, Ohio, and I can tell you that we have a lot of problems there, and one is, there just isn't access to good food. So hopefully you all will be willing to help out with that. Theminimalists.com/Dayton for details. Also, Ryan and I are going on tour. We're 3 cities, Birmingham and Louisville, Kentucky, and then we'll be in Nashville, Tennessee. We're talking about money and minimalism. It's called the Simply Southern Tour. And you can find all the details at our website, theminimalists.com. That's mid-July. I think it's the 20th, 22nd, and 24th. We're going to have Chris Hogan and Rachel Cruz and Anthony O'Neill with us talking about money and minimalism. So bring your questions with you. It's going to be different from any other event we've ever done. And I think that's... one other thing. On YouTube, I've been doing something called Living Room Conversations. So literally every day in my living room, I just turn on my phone and I answer one question. Someone asks a question, and I've gotten some of the best responses from these quick videos, impromptu. I don't have anything prepared. Someone just asks a question and I answer one question. It's 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and that's why we started the video version of the podcast too, because a lot of people are finding value in the video creation. So if you want to check those out, one question a day over at YouTube, just youtube.com/theminimalists. All right, that's all I have besides these voicemail comments and tips from our listeners.
Hi, my name is Sabrina. I'm from Brooklyn, and I was just listening to your podcast about food. One thing I encourage people to do when they go to the farmer's market in order to save money is to ask the farmers for second choice produce. It's the stuff that's a little bit bruised or it's not quite as pretty, and they usually sell it for quite a steep discount. So oftentimes I can get tomatoes that are originally $6 a pound for $2 a pound. So if people are looking to budget or to save money on food, especially organic, local food, I encourage you to ask for the less beautiful produce.
This is Joe from Dallas, and this was a comment for some parents who have trouble with all the things that their kids have and don't necessarily want to throw away their children's things without permission from their children's or talking to their kids about it. We had a playroom that was exploding with toys, and what we did was we adapted the minimalism game for our kids. And so we asked them what motivated them, and they talked about getting new toys. So we decided we were going to let them do it for a month, and for every number that they got to on their game, we would give them $10 at the end of the month to spend. So the first toy they got rid of, they got $10. And then to get to number 2, they'd give away 2 toys, and they'd be at $20. And then 3 toys, and so it'd be 6 toys total, and they'd be at $30. Just like the minimalism game. But we didn't go by days. We just let them go as the month went on. I underestimated my children. They each got to 13 toys, which was over 90 and really over 100 because they got rid of some collections of toys, like plastic dinosaur collection would be one toy. And so I owed them $260 to go on a shopping spree. And instead of buying 13 toys each, they pooled their money and they bought 3 toys that they really wanted. And so I traded in 200 toys for 3 toys. And in 1 month, we really got rid of a big chunk of that playroom. And on a whim, after we went on our shopping spree for the 3 items, I drew 91 smiley faces on a napkin to show my daughter. And I said, this is how many kids that you made happy this month. And for those that are worried about consumerism or teaching their kids that, you know, the reward for doing well is to go on a shopping spree, when they had a play date a few days later and they brought their friends to their playroom, it wasn't the new toys that they went to. They had kept the napkin, and they showed their friends that, you know, they were so proud of how many kids that they had made happy this month. And we've had it continue to go for the last couple of months, and we have drastically reduced the amount of toys that we have in the house, and the kids have toys that they really, really wanted and that they were invested in because they got to choose them themselves. I hope this helps some families out there. It's been very helpful for us.
Hey, Minimalists. My name is Emma, calling from Mammoth Lakes, California. I recently listened to your episode on social media, and I had a great tip for people who were looking to cut back their use of social media, whether it be for time spent using it or just the fact that getting caught up with social media is taken away from the other things in their life that are bringing them value. One thing I have done to cut back my use of social media is gone to my settings of my phone and turned off cellular use data for certain apps. So, for example, if I want to cut back my time spent on Facebook, I can go to my cellular use area of my settings and turn off cellular data for that app, meaning I can only access that app if I'm if I'm connected to internet. And I've done this for most of my social media apps, just because it cuts back how much I use them and allows me to, A, save some of my data because I don't like going over and having to spend more money, but also just not using the apps as much as I used to.
All right, Joe, that's almost it for this episode. I want to thank you both for being here today. Chris, Tommy, this is one of the best conversations we've ever had on this podcast, mainly because Ryan wasn't here. But you are a wealth of knowledge. I'm grateful that you decided to come in today and spend this time with me. And I know folks will get immense value from this, whether they watch it on YouTube or they just listen to the podcast. But I'm really grateful you decided to spend this time with us. Thank you so much.
Oh, likewise. Yeah, thank you for having us, and thank you for being such a fantastic client. And yeah, Tommy, he is a wealth of knowledge, and I've not really met anyone that can integrate all of the things out there quite like you can in such an unbiased way. So, yeah, super glad to be here and have the opportunity. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. And if y'all have a question for the Minimalist, give us a call or a comment for the end of the episodes, 406-219-7839. You can also email a voice memo right from your phone to podcast@theminimalists.com. And if y'all leave here with just one message, we hope it's this: love people and use things, because the opposite never works. Thanks for listening, y'all. We'll see you next time.
The Minimalists.